The story begins with our main character, Kenji, a helpful and kind boy who's always ready to help others. One morning, while on his way to school like usual, he hears some noise. Curious, he walks over and sees some bullies picking on one of his classmates. After noticing him, they call him over and tell him that the boy has no mother and all he has left is one photo of her, which they're about to tear up because he has no money to give them. The bullies tell Kenji that if he doesn't buy the photo, they'll really tear it apart. Kenji tries to reason with them, but they don't listen. Left with no choice, he hands them $100, and only then do they leave the boy alone. The kid thanks Kenji, calls him kind, and Kenji smiles warmly. The boy asks him why he's so kind, and Kenji replies that it's our duty to help others, and he has his reasons. Now at the school, everyone greets Kenji happily, including a pretty girl named Susan, which makes him even happier after sometimes Susan asks for his help taking the trash out. And on the way, praises him for always helping everyone. While they're talking, we see the same bullies again, enjoying themselves with Kenji's money. One of them, Jong, calls out to Susan. She nervously greets him, and Kenji wonders if Jong is bullying her too. Jong tells Kenji to leave them alone, but Kenji was hesitating. Susan quickly tells Kenji not to worry and that she's fine. So he walks away, thinking since they're still at school, nothing serious will happen. He decides if anything goes wrong, he'll call his uncle. As soon as Kenji leaves, the rest of the bullies also go, leaving Susan and Jong alone. Susan looks around to check if anyone's watching and tells Jong not to talk to her at school. Jong teases her, asking if she's embarrassed and worried about her image. She says it's not like that, and when Jong touches her shoulder and compliments her looks, she gently pushes him away and reminds him they're still at school. What they don't know is that Kenji secretly saw everything and he's shocked and angry. He realizes they're dating. Heartbroken, Kenji walks back to class silently, feeling betrayed. His eyes fill with tears, and just when he's about to text Susan, the school bell rings. As Kenji walks home, Susan catches up and says it's been a while since they walked home together. Kenji quietly agrees. She asks if something's wrong, and Kenji suddenly asks, "Are you dating Jong?" Susan gets nervous and hesitantly admits that she was planning to tell him, and they just recently started somehow. Kenji is shocked. A flashback shows Susan's abusive, alcoholic father yelling and looking for her when she had once run away from home. Kenji had hidden her during that time, and she had told him she'd never marry a man like her father, only someone kind like Kenji. That moment had inspired Kenji to become the kind person he is. Back in the present, Kenji reminds her of what she said, saying Jong is nothing like a kind man. Susan responds that she once dated a kind guy, but he was boring. Jong, on the other hand, is bad but attractive and exciting. Kenji goes silent. Years of effort to be a good person felt wasted. In frustration and pain, he grabs Susan's hand and says he's worse than Jong, that he was only pretending to be kind, that he's actually a gangster by blood, and kindness was just an act. He starts crying while saying all this. Susan thinks he's joking and laughs, calling him a good person. She believes Kenji is just jealous because she's dating a bully. She shakes his hand and unintentionally friend-zoned him before walking ahead. Just then, Jong shows up, grabs Susan, and tells Kenji to stay away. Susan stops Jong and asks Kenji to come along too, and while walking, she flirts with Jong. Kenji stands there watching them walk away, full of questions. Why was this happening? He had spent the last 10 years becoming the best version of himself, but none of it mattered. So now Kenji decides it's time to become a real gangster. He wasn't joking earlier. When he said gangster blood runs in his veins, he meant it. We now see Kenji's home. It's actually a gangster household. The gang members bow to him with respect. Fueled by pain, revenge, or maybe just to prove Susan wrong, Kenji decides to become a gangster and bursts into his uncle's room, demanding to become a gangster and asking for help. His uncle, surprised but delighted, gives him a devilish smile. He had been waiting for this moment for 10 years. Kenji had tried for a decade to be kind, but his uncle always said, "It only takes a few seconds to become bad." Kenji was ready to give up everything he had been for the past 10 years. Then his uncle said the first step was to drop the good boy vibe. For that, Kenji would need a complete makeover. No more friendly smiles either. Gangsters always wore a serious face. His uncle then asked why Kenji suddenly wanted to become a bad guy. Kenji replied that he no longer had a reason to stay good. He was still thinking about Sujin and Zhang when he wondered aloud if he could really become a bad man like his uncle. Just then, number 2 walked in to help Kenji dress the part. Kenji stepped out of his room wearing a thick gold chain and full-on gangster-style clothes. He asked if it was okay to wear this to school. His uncle nodded and told him he looked perfect. As Kenji walked through the school corridor, everyone stared at him. He wanted to greet them, but his uncle had strictly warned him not to say hello to anyone and to be rude to every girl he talked to. When he entered the classroom, he was a bit nervous. All his friends greeted him, but Kenji ignored them and quietly took a seat. Everyone wondered what was going on with him. Sujin asked if he wanted to go to the cafeteria, and though Kenji couldn't refuse, he answered in a cold, distant way. Sujin was confused, and the rest of the class assumed the two had fought. On the way, Sujin asked why he was ignoring her and acting like a completely different person. Kenji didn't deny it. He said he had changed. No, she had. He reminded her how he had once changed himself for her 10 years ago, and now he had done it again because of her. For the first time, Kenji skipped classes. Behind the school building, he saw Zhang hanging out with a few other kids, also skipping. Zhang was smoking and later left with a girl to get something to eat. Curious to know what students did when they skipped, Kenji followed them. When he noticed how close the two were, he wondered if the girl was Zhang's girlfriend. Kenji judged Sujin's taste silently and continued tailing them. Eventually, the two reached Zhang's house. The girl refused to go inside, saying she only wanted to grab food, but Zhang insisted and tried to pull her in. When she pushed back, he grabbed her hand. She slapped him. Zhang, now furious, raised his hand to slap her back. Kenji, watching this unfold, thought about calling the police, but he decided to handle it himself. He picked up a rock and hurled it, but it accidentally hit the girl. Still, Kenji didn't stop. He picked up another rock and this time hit Zhang squarely on the head, knocking him to the ground. Before Zhang could even figure out what was happening, Kenji ran forward and grabbed the girl's hand to help her escape. Zhang shouted threats but didn't recognize who Kenji was. The girl was yelling at Kenji too, thinking he had attacked her. But soon she realized he was trying to help. They stopped somewhere safe. Kenji was confused, unsure of what to say. He handed her some bandages and tried to explain. She teased him a bit and introduced herself. Her name was Lee. She was from the same class but hadn't recognized Kenji due to his appearance. Lee was shocked. She'd only heard stories about how kind Kenji was and how he helped everyone. But Kenji insisted he wasn't kind at all. He claimed he was mean and only helped her because the situation was serious. Then he asked if she liked bad guys like Zhang. Lee replied that she liked boys who lived freely, like birds. Kenji asked if she thought he could become as awful as Zhang. Lee just laughed. Then suddenly Zhang called her. Kenji begged her not to tell Zhang about him. On the call, Zhang was furious and asked who helped her earlier. He said the guy wore their school uniform. Lee warned him that if he misbehaved again, she'd call the police, then cut the call. She then told Kenji she didn't want to report Zhang because she had hit him first. Before leaving, she thanked Kenji and walked away. Later that day, Kenji's friends teased him, saying he was glowing like Zhang himself. Kenji felt proud. This was exactly the look he wanted. His friends were stunned by the transformation. Soon after, Lee came over and joined him for lunch. She even told his friends how Kenji had helped her. Kenji quietly stood up and walked away. He didn't want anyone to know about the incident. Lee followed him. Kenji's friends watched, smiling on the outside, but deep down they looked hurt, something clearly visible on their faces. In the washroom, Kenji remembered that his teacher had called him to the office. His friends had informed him earlier. He didn't want to make the teacher angry, so he began removing all his jewelry. That's when he noticed one ring was missing. Panic hit him hard. It wasn't just any ring. His second uncle had given it to him, and that uncle had received it from his boss. Kenji frantically looked around for it. While searching under his desk, Zhang suddenly appeared behind him. He looked at Kenji's back and realized it resembled the guy from earlier. Zhang started hitting him. Kenji was too stunned to react. Sujin stood there, just watching. Then Lee arrived and told Zhang he should be mad at her, not Kenji. Zhang grabbed her by the neck and demanded to know who had helped her that day. Lee feared Zhang might actually hurt her. She wondered who was the one Zhang truly feared in this class. So, she shouted out the name song, the most muscular guy in class who was dozing off in the back. Zhang froze for a second. He walked over to Song, called his name, but Song ignored him. Frustrated, Zhang kicked his desk. The whole class watched, shocked. Lee realized her plan might have failed. She had hoped just mentioning Song's name would scare Zhang off. But Song slowly stood up and quickly understood the situation. He glared at Zhang. Zhang hesitated. Still, he asked if Song was the guy from that day. Song casually said maybe. Zhang angrily grabbed his collar. Song calmly removed Zhang's grip and held his hand. Just once. That was enough. Zhang backed away immediately. Then Zhang walked over to Kenji, sat in front of him, and asked himself, could this guy really throw a rock at me? No, he thought someone this weak couldn't possibly have done it. That's when Kenji noticed something horrifying. Zhang was wearing his uncle's ring. Kenji froze. He began wondering how he'd ever get that ring back. After Zhang left, Lee came and tried to help Kenji. Sujin saw them together and felt extremely jealous. Lee thanked Song before leaving. Song, still confused, just said, "You're welcome," and walked off. Meanwhile, Kenji remained lost in thought, worrying about the ring. When Kenji reached home, his uncles were furious seeing his condition. His second uncle wanted to hunt down the person responsible immediately. But the first uncle stopped everyone and said this was Kenji's fight. He had to face it on his own. They gathered for a strategy meeting to start Kenji's training. But before that, he had to prove himself by winning a fight. Just one against someone weaker. The next morning, everyone wished him luck. Kenji, however, was already anxious. He needed to get the ring back from Zhang and win a fight. While heading out, Kenji saw an old lady he used to help regularly. But his uncle's words echoed in his head. Real gangsters don't help without a reason. With tears in his eyes, he walked away. Later, he saw an old grandpa he had also helped before. But again, he walked away, sobbing. Soon, he noticed a group of school delinquents crossing the road despite the red light. Kenji tried to cross like them but got yelled at by a truck driver. He apologized. He wasn't trying to rebel, he was just trying to be bad like the others. He tried again, this time successfully ran across during the red light. That small victory made him smile. But just then, he spotted Sujin. He was about to wave hello, but then saw Zhang walking beside her. Kenji quickly hid. Sujin looked so genuinely happy with Zhang. After everything that happened, Kenji made up his mind. He was going all in on being a bad boy. Just up ahead, he saw Lee and her gang of girls bullying the same kid he had helped before. The moment they spotted Kenji, the girls laughed and told him to scram. The poor kid's eyes lit up, thinking his hero had returned. But nope. Lee casually started fixing her makeup, and Kenji suddenly turned on the boy, threatening him to cough up all his money or get seriously beat down. From a distance, Kenji's second uncle saw it all. Tears almost welled up in his eyes. To him, it looked like Kenji was finally becoming a man. The girls were pretty impressed too, even saying Kenji looked tougher than Zhang. That made Kenji feel proud, though Lee looked far from thrilled. The frightened boy handed over his cash, hoping maybe Kenji would return it later. Instead, Kenji split it with the girls. Later, the second uncle ran into Zhang and nearly did a double take. Zhang was wearing his old ring. He quietly wondered if Zhang was one of Kenji's friends, since they'd crossed paths so many times before. But he kept quiet, hoping Zhang wasn't, because if not, he could finally teach the kid a lesson. Back at school, a teacher called Kenji in and said they needed to meet his dad. Kenji was causing too much trouble lately. Kenji instantly shut that idea down. Involving his dad was definitely not part of the plan. The teachers were confused, so Kenji lied and said his dad was out of town, offering to bring his uncle instead. Outside the office, Kenji's friend asked what was going on, but Kenji just brushed him off. Later that day at home, Kenji told his three uncles that one of them had to go to school with him. The three men got way too excited and played rock, paper, scissors to decide. The second uncle won, and the others gave him a playful smack on the head before walking off in defeat. The next morning, the second uncle went full bad guy mode, dressed up sharp but totally gangster-like. Kenji was horrified. Deep inside, he wished the first uncle had won. But they were already late, so they rushed out. Strangely, everyone on the street greeted his uncle with respect, which confused Kenji. His uncle didn't look scary at all, so why was everyone so nervous? On the way, his uncle asked if Kenji had done anything shady lately. Then, for no reason, he started teaching Kenji how to walk and spit like a proper gangster. By the time they reached school, Kenji wanted to disappear. All eyes were on them. He prayed Susan wouldn't see. His classmates were frozen. Kenji showed up with what looked like a full-blown mobster. The uncle then casually asked about the soul ring he gave Kenji. Kenji, sweating, lied that he left it at home for safekeeping. Down the hall, Lee spotted them and looked totally confused. Kenji covered his face, pointed his uncle toward the office, and slipped away, already regretting his life choices. Inside the staff room, the teachers were stunned. Was this really Kenji's uncle? Someone even whispered about calling the police. But the head teacher confidently said he'd handle it. Trying to keep things cool, he offered the uncle tea and insisted they treated Kenji like a prince. When asked why he was called, the uncle was told that Kenji was acting out, even though he was still a candidate for class president. The uncle laughed and asked if they seriously thought Kenji was a troublemaker. That laugh gave the head teacher a mini heart attack, so he quickly tried to change the topic. The uncle, secretly proud, nodded approvingly. Then the uncle suddenly asked, was it normal for students to steal things here? The head teacher panicked, quickly assuring him the school was super safe and well-behaved. The uncle said nothing more and quietly walked out, leaving the head teacher to wipe his sweaty forehead. Meanwhile, the uncle had only one thought. If I ever find the punk wearing my soul ring, he's done for. Kenji's second uncle suddenly remembered something the first uncle had once said. Kenji needed to fight his own battles. That thought helped him cool down and stay calm, even though he was boiling inside. Meanwhile, we see Jong daydreaming about selling the soul ring. He planned to buy a shiny new motorcycle and even gave a silent thanks to the rock that smacked him that day. It had really changed his life. Back in class, Kenji's friend asked how the teacher meeting went. But one look at Kenji's serious face made him too nervous to push further. Just then, the head teacher entered the room, avoiding eye contact with Kenji like he owed him money. Kenji instantly got suspicious. Had his uncle scared the teachers that badly? Wanting answers, he asked to use the restroom. The teacher looked annoyed, until he realized who was asking. Suddenly, he smiled and said Kenji didn't even need permission. Now Kenji knew something weird had happened. He tried calling his first uncle, who was too busy planning a surprise party to pick up. Why a party? Because Kenji had officially joined the Naughty Boys Club. The second uncle picked up instead. When Kenji asked what had gone down in the office, his uncle acted super chill and said everything was fine. That only made Kenji more nervous. Then the first uncle finally grabbed the phone and casually reminded Kenji that today, he had to beat someone up. Kenji just said, okay. After the call, Kenji started thinking seriously. Who should he beat up? He considered himself level 1 and began mentally ranking everyone around him. 2 boys walked by, but they looked like levels 2 and 3. Even his own friend ranked higher than him. He kept searching, but no one was weak enough. Later, we find Kenji in the bathroom, stressed and splashing water on his face. He couldn't believe it. Was he really the weakest kid around? Suddenly, a bulky guy named Song walked in and told Kenji to move. Song was level 70, a whole other planet. Kenji sighed, thinking, how am I the son of a gang leader and still this weak? Just then, the same bullied boy he had saved earlier walked in. Kenji's eyes lit up. Level 0. Finally, someone weaker than him. The boy even smiled and complimented Kenji's acting, asking if he could get his money back now. Kenji grabbed his collar and declared that the boy was today's sacrificial lamb. It was time to train. At first, the kid thought Kenji was still pretending. But then panic hit when he realized Kenji was serious. Desperate, he turned to Song and begged for help. Kenji hadn't even noticed Song was still there. For a moment, Kenji thought his plan had fallen apart. But Song just stared, then silently walked away. Kenji now had his chance. He closed his eyes, raised his fist, but couldn't do it. Something inside him refused. Is this really me? He wondered. Why doesn't it feel good? He remembered helping this boy, how grateful the kid had been, how much he trusted him. Then Kenji shook his head. No, I'm not that softy anymore. I'm a delinquent now, and I'll prove it to Susan. I have to be bad. With that, he returned to class. But the whole vibe in the classroom had changed. Everyone stared at him like he was a different person. The bullied boy had already told everyone what happened. Susan looked shocked and came straight to him, asking if it was true. The rest of the class watched in silence. Susan kept pressing him, so Kenji snapped. He told her to shut up and said she was the one who hated boys without makeup or style. So what was she even doing? Then, with a smirk, he added that she looked good. Jong overheard that line and immediately thought Kenji was hitting on Susan. His eyes narrowed, full of fire. Kenji tried to explain, but Jong wasn't having it. He stormed over and slapped Kenji hard across the face. Kenji froze, completely shocked. Jong then called over his gang and told them to hold Kenji down. He said he was going to teach him a lesson. Without hesitation, he punched Kenji in the stomach, knocking the air out of him. Just as he was about to throw another punch, Susan stepped in and yelled for him to stop. The moment Jong saw Kenji and Susan supporting each other, something clicked, and not in a good way. Suspicion crept in, and he stormed over to Susan, fuming. Susan went quiet, clearly nervous. Jong sarcastically said they seemed like a perfect couple, and just as he raised his hand to hit her, Kenji stepped in, blocked him, and called him human trash without blinking. Kenji told him that if he wanted to date Susan, fine, he didn't care. But if Jong ever laid a hand on her again, he'd deal with him personally. Right then, Song, who had been dozing off in class, shot up from his seat. Kenji's face looked dead serious, filled with a rage Susan had never seen before. Memories rushed back into Kenji's head. How Susan used to like honest and sweet boys. But now she seemed drawn to the bad types. And here Kenji was, half thinking of beating up her boyfriend just to become one. Back in the present, Jong's friends had Kenji pinned down while Jong was about to hit him. Kenji tried to fight back with a kick, but missed. Suddenly, a strong punch landed, surprisingly not from Kenji, but from Song. He'd switched sides and decided to back Kenji. The whole class was stunned. Song in a fight? That was rare. Jong, burning with anger, demanded to know if Song had lost his mind. But Song responded by punching him again, this time harder. Strangely, none of Jong's friends stepped in to help, as if they didn't care anymore. Jong yelled, asking why Song kept interfering. Song calmly replied that Jong was the one always butting into everything. Then, with his dominant hand, Song landed another solid punch that dropped Jong to the floor, shaking like a leaf. Jong's buddies rushed to lift him up and got him out of there. Meanwhile, Song helped Kenji to his feet, though Kenji stumbled a bit, probably more from Song's heavy hand than his injuries. The scene then shifted to the nurse's office, where Jong and his gang were secretly plotting revenge. But they all knew the truth. None of them stood a chance against Song. The guy hadn't even used his full strength yet. Those punches? Yeah, just shoulder power. Jong's friends were scared of round 2, but Jong came up with a new plan. If they couldn't beat Song directly, they'd go after the people close to him. Meanwhile, Song brought Kenji into the nurse's room. Kenji asked why Song didn't stop him that day in the bathroom when he was beating up a kid. Song said he thought the kid must have done something wrong, because Kenji never hit anyone without reason. Hearing that made Kenji feel awful since the kid had actually been innocent. Then he asked why Song always tried to save him from Jong. Song avoided a direct answer, saying Jong deserved those beatings anyway, and if Kenji got saved along the way, well, bonus. Kenji was about to ask more, but Song quietly walked out before he could. The scene cut to the cafeteria, where Lee was trying to be friendly with Kenji's crew. One smart friend pointed out that they knew Lee wanted to get close to Kenji, but neither they nor Kenji were interested. Lee apologized and tried to charm them with sweet talk. She even asked about their girlfriends. That's when one guy finally caught on. Lee wasn't just being nice. She wanted to be Kenji's girlfriend. He told her straight up, Kenji doesn't go for bully girls. But then their not-so-bright friend jumped in, saying maybe he could be her friend, then awkwardly trailed off. Lee snapped at him, asking if he knew what kind of girl Kenji actually liked. If not, he should shut up. After thinking for a moment, he casually suggested she should ask Susan. Since Susan and Kenji were childhood friends, she'd probably know. One of the smarter boys quietly thought Lee shouldn't ask Susan directly. Maybe that's why she was trying to get answers from them instead. But now Lee made up her mind. She was going to ask Kenji herself what kind of girl he liked. Right after Lee left, Kenji's clueless friend whispered to the other that he was pretty sure Lee had a crush on Kenji. Just then, Lee's two besties mentioned that Kenji had gone to the nurse's office after getting beat up by Jong. Without wasting a second, Lee bolted toward the nurse's office like it was some kind of emergency. Her friends started panicking, wondering if she had actually fallen for that loser. At the nurse's office, Lee found Kenji sitting quietly, wiping tears and hiding his face. As soon as he heard someone enter, he quickly pretended to be asleep. He thought it might be the doctor and didn't want to be caught crying. Lee sat beside him, asked if he was okay, and mumbled angrily about Zhang. But she didn't try to wake him. Instead, she just sat there for a while, left him some snacks, and stormed out with fire in her eyes, thinking that someone seriously needed to put Zhang in his place. Meanwhile, Kenji stared at the snacks, wondering why Lee had left them for him. Then the scene jumped to the school gate. Susan was entering and soon reached the nurse's office, where she noticed the snacks Lee had left behind. That was it, her temper exploded. She found Lee beyond annoying and seriously questioned when that girl would finally grow a brain. In a fit of anger, she grabbed the food and dumped it straight into the trash. She knew one thing for sure. Kenji didn't like girls like Lee. Susan went over to Kenji and was just about to touch his head gently when Song walked in with the doctor. The doctor turned to Susan and asked how Kenji got hurt so badly. Both Song and Kenji waited for her answer. Susan took a breath and lied. She said Kenji had fallen down the stairs, all to protect her boyfriend. Kenji's eyes welled up again. The doctor assumed he had gotten hurt while helping someone, like he always did, and smiled warmly, saying Kenji was lucky to have such a good friend. Susan left without saying more, but the doctor noticed the truth. Kenji was awake and silently crying. She could tell he didn't want anyone worrying about him. She quietly told him he could cry as much as he needed. She wouldn't let anyone else in. And with that, Kenji finally broke down completely, wondering how his childhood friend could lie just to protect her boyfriend. Meanwhile, Zhang was off with his two goons, planning how to sell Kenji's second uncle's ring. Suddenly, Lee showed up, furious and ready to blow. Zhang's two buddies made a run for it, and Lee started ripping into Zhang. He acted like the victim and claimed he was the one who got beat up today. But Lee wasn't buying it. She said her taste in guys had clearly been trash. Zhang shot back that she was the one who came to him first, not the other way around. So she'd better show some respect. Just then, Susan, who had been searching for Zhang, finally found him and overheard the whole heated exchange. She froze on the spot, wondering if these two were actually dating behind her back. Inside, things got even uglier. Zhang was now threatening Lee and telling her to stay away from him, and Susan, listening from outside, was completely shaken. She started wondering if Zhang had been cheating on her this whole time. But Lee wasn't scared. She told him straight up she'd call the cops. Watching all this, Susan's heart broke. She tried to convince herself that Zhang wasn't like this, that maybe Lee was the one chasing him around. But deep down, she knew she was just lying to herself. Unable to hold it in anymore, she stormed into the room, yelling. Lee was stunned to see her and asked what she was doing there. Zhang, fed up with the drama, lashed out at Susan. She demanded to know if he was really dating Lee. Zhang, totally done with the situation, said he was already planning to break up with Lee, and now he was breaking up with Susan too. Susan felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. She stood there in shock, speechless. Lee was just as surprised, so they were really dating all this time. Zhang rolled his eyes at the both of them and walked off like he couldn't care less. As he left, Lee turned to Susan and asked if they were actually in a relationship. But Susan couldn't even speak. She just cried silently. Back in the nurse's office, Kenji left without getting any treatment. He tried to convince himself that if he had been Susan's boyfriend, maybe she would have defended him too. He started blaming himself for not being the guy by her side. And now, if he really wanted Susan, he had only one option left. He had to become a bad boy. But bad boys usually beat people up, and Kenji didn't want to hit anyone weak. Then one name popped into his mind, a guy he could punch without feeling guilty. When he got home, he noticed something strange. The house was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Definitely not normal. When Kenji stepped inside the house, he was stunned to see all his uncles standing in the hallway with their heads bowed. Confused, he wondered what was going on. That's when a familiar voice echoed through the hall. It was his father's. The moment his father saw him, he seemed pleasantly surprised. Kenji had come home on time and was even dressed in a style that matched his father's. Kenji, completely shocked, asked what his dad was doing here. His father told him to sit down. He'd come after 3 long years, but only because he'd heard Kenji wanted to become a delinquent. But the moment he saw the bruises on Kenji, he told him to stand up. Kenji noticed posters on the wall celebrating his transformation into a problem child, but his father looked more disappointed than proud. In his eyes, Kenji wasn't the kind of punk who beat people up. He was the kind who came home after getting beat up. That's why all the uncles were standing like that, as punishment. His father said he hadn't given Kenji 10 years just to come back home beaten. He ordered the first uncle to begin Kenji's successor training immediately. The first uncle nodded without hesitation. Kenji tried to make excuses, but his father reminded him that those 10 years were already his chance to be a kind boy for some girl. And all he did in that time was get beaten up. Then he said he wouldn't force Kenji into training, but if he refused, he'd walk away for good. Their father-son relationship would end right there. Kenji broke down in tears, yelling that his father had no idea what he'd been through. He never asked for this life. He never dreamed of being a gangster's son. He just wanted to live a normal life. But his father said he couldn't wait around forever for Kenji's success. He had already prepared backup options, expecting Kenji to reject the offer. There were many boys in the world who could be called his sons, but Kenji was still his first choice. Kenji asked for a little more time, but his dad reminded him that he'd already had 10 years. Now he only had until tomorrow. No more delays. Kenji was heartbroken. In a fit of anger, he called his dad the worst father ever. Without saying another word, his father left. Kenji sat in shock, unsure what to do next. Even the uncles looked worried. None of them expected the boss to show up so suddenly. If Kenji was no longer the son, their positions would be gone too, and the entire gang could fall apart. They went over to Kenji and asked if he was okay, and whether he got beat up again. Then they asked the real question. Had he beaten up anyone weaker yet? Kenji said no. The uncles told him that once he became strong, he wouldn't need to hit weaklings to beat bad guys. They advised him to start training. Kenji said he wasn't ready, but one of the uncles told him seriously, if he cared about someone and wanted to protect them, he had no choice but to become strong. That hit Kenji hard. He asked what the point of being bad was. He didn't want to be like Jong. The uncle told him it was his choice, but from where they stood, he needed the training. Then they walked away, leaving him to think. Kenji sat down, holding his head. Who was he trying to protect anyway? Just then, his phone rang. It was Susan, crying. She told him everything, how Jong had abandoned her. Kenji asked for details, and as soon as he heard it all, his blood boiled. He ran to his uncles and declared that he was accepting the successor training. He was done. From now on, he'd deal with people like Jong himself. He asked his uncles to help him become stronger. They assured him they'd been waiting 10 years for this moment. First uncle warned that if his training started, he wouldn't be able to attend school. Kenji said fine, no hesitation. He was finally ready to learn how to fight. First uncle handed him over to the second uncle, a former athlete. All the uncles got emotional. It was a big moment. Then second uncle asked Kenji about the ring. Where was it? And warned him not to lie. This time, Kenji told the truth. Jong had it. He was Kenji's biggest enemy. Second uncle said if Kenji wanted, they could get the ring back in seconds. But Kenji, now fully motivated, said he'd do it himself, alone. That was the kind of answer second uncle was hoping for. He hugged Kenji, proud and pumped that the time had finally come to put Jong in his place. And with that, the battle officially began. Kenji finally realized this wasn't just a talk anymore. This was a full-on mission. With a serious face, he said he wasn't backing down now. He wasn't that quiet, helpful guy anymore. He was the future leader of the Fire Bear Gang. In the next scene, his second uncle kicked off his training. First up was a basic physical test. They began with 3 simple exercises, starting with squats. Kenji was handed an empty barbell, but he couldn't even lift 20 kilos. He struggled so hard that he looked like he might pass out. His uncle watched, slightly worried. Then came the bench press. Kenji grabbed the bar and told his uncle he'd need help with this one too. Even on an empty road, Kenji had been struggling, and now it was clear he was really weak. His uncle was stuck, wondering what kind of training would even work on this kid. Finally, he moved on to the last test of the day, the deadlift. He had 0 expectations that Kenji would succeed. But surprise, Kenji lifted the weight easily. His uncle blinked in disbelief, so he added more weight. Kenji lifted it again, no problem. With a grin, Kenji told him he could lift heavier. Now his uncle was straight up confused. Where did this power even come from? Then it clicked. Kenji had spent years helping others, always lifting things, always on the move. No wonder he'd built some strength along the way. The uncle decided to test his grip strength next and challenged him to an arm wrestle. The rest of the gang thought Kenji had no chance. He was going to lose for sure. But second uncle knew there was something different about Kenji. As they locked hands, Kenji held his own. Outsiders thought the uncle was going easy, but in truth, he was using every ounce of strength. Slowly, it made sense. Kenji had been massaging his uncles every day for 10 years. That daily arm workout had given him beast-level grip strength. The uncle was proud, but he wasn't ready to lose. He turned up the power. So did Kenji. The uncle's face turned red, and in the end, Kenji won. Even Kenji couldn't believe it. He'd beaten his own uncle. The uncle thought, if trained right, Kenji could become the strongest kid in school, or maybe even rule the whole area. For the first time, he saw the true potential of a future Fire Bear Gang leader in Kenji. He called Kenji over and told him he could become truly powerful. Kenji thought his uncle had let him win on purpose and didn't trust him at first. But the uncle promised, if Kenji followed his words, no one would be able to beat him. First, though, he'd have to cut off contact with everyone else. Kenji hesitated, but when his uncle said that protecting the people he loved meant becoming stronger, and promised to make him strong, Kenji agreed. Training officially began. 3 days passed. Back at school, Song was wondering why Kenji hadn't shown up. He asked around, but nobody knew anything. Kenji wasn't even picking up his phone. A few friends had gone to his house but ran off after seeing his scary uncles. Song started to worry. When he got home, his little sister ran to him and hugged him. She said Kenji hadn't come to play for days, and now she was super bored. She was scared that maybe Kenji had gotten hurt while helping someone again. Kenji's little sister begged Song to go check on him, and Song agreed. The next day after school, he headed straight to Kenji's place. At first, Kenji's uncles were a little suspicious, but when Song said he was Kenji's friend, they rolled out the red carpet for him. But then the first uncle found out a stranger had been brought home without checking his identity. He scolded the other 2 uncles and demanded to know why they let someone in without confirming who he was. Song, holding onto his wallet, silently thanked himself for bringing ID. First uncle asked why he was there. Song explained that Kenji hadn't shown up at school or picked up any calls, so he was worried. Just then, he noticed Song's judo bag and called in second uncle. The moment he saw Song, second uncle recognized him and reminded first uncle that this was the same kid they had lunch with at Lea Park. Meanwhile, Song was totally confused. Why did Kenji's uncles look so intimidating? Trying to stay polite, he greeted first uncle with a respect and was then taken to the training room. There, he saw Kenji training instead of attending school. Second uncle asked Song if he thought Kenji could win this fight. Song watched as Kenji faced off against third uncle and immediately thought, no way. But second uncle told him to look closely. Kenji wasn't using judo. Kenji grabbed third uncle by the collar using just his right hand. Song couldn't believe it. How was he planning to throw him with one hand? He wasn't even that strong. But then, shocker, Kenji tossed third uncle to the ground using just that one arm and proudly called the move one-arm throw. Song stood frozen, completely stumped. That's when second uncle revealed that Song's level was similar to a mutual friend of theirs, one of the top national athletes. They wanted Song to fight Kenji. They knew Song had been training hard to win gold at the national judo tournament, but Kenji wasn't aiming for medals. He wanted to defeat someone. Second uncle said Song would now have to fight him. Song agreed, and when Kenji saw him, he was shocked. What was Song doing here? Second uncle told Kenji he wanted him to fight kids his own age, kids who were way stronger than him. He assured Kenji that if he did this, he'd become the strongest guy in school. But Kenji panicked after seeing Song's physique. Their power difference was obvious. As the match started, Song grabbed Kenji and slammed him down with no effort. Round 1, Song easily. Kenji got hurt, both physically and mentally, but he didn't give up. He got up, dodged Song's grip, and jumped back, switching into a boxing stance. He started throwing punches. Song could read the moves and block them easily, but still the punches were heavy, they were landing hard. Suddenly, Kenji went in for a tackle. Song thought it was dumb. Kenji clearly didn't get the difference in size. But then, plot twist, Kenji didn't tackle. He grabbed Song with his monster grip and began crushing his thighs. Song screamed in pain and tried to fight back, but Kenji wouldn't let go. He never expected Kenji to use dirty tricks. This annoyed third uncle, who snapped at second uncle for teaching Kenji such cowardly moves. But second uncle explained, Kenji wasn't just holding him, he was crushing him. His grip was so intense that it was doing real damage. And it was true, Song couldn't even move his leg for a while. Kenji saw his chance and attacked again. But this time, Song blocked and asked if Kenji wanted a real fight. Kenji didn't answer, he just punched him right in the neck. That made Song furious. He accused Kenji of aiming for his neck. Kenji quickly apologized and said he was aiming for the chin. But because he's short, he missed. Now Song got serious. They went all out for a few more rounds until both of them were exhausted. Kenji lay on the ground, wiped out. Song looked at him and asked, if you're this strong, then how the hell did you lose to a guy like Jong? Second uncle calmly explained that Kenji had never actually fought anyone before. He always gave up before the first punch, simply out of fear. That's exactly why they made him spar with someone as strong as Song, to help him build confidence. Then he turned to Song and thanked him, inviting him to stay for dinner. A little later, third uncle led Song to the dining table. Meanwhile, second uncle checked on Kenji and was surprised to see him smiling. He asked how Kenji could feel so refreshed after such an intense fight. At the table, everyone gathered. Song looked a bit unsure when he saw beef on the menu. He wasn't used to eating it. Kenji asked if he was allergic, but Song shook his head and started eating anyway. Then second uncle asked Song if he'd be willing to train with Kenji for a week. He promised to take care of all his meals and needs. Song politely declined, saying he couldn't stay overnight because he had to take care of his little sister. Second uncle suggested he come by after school instead. But Song mentioned that he had judo classes after school. Without hesitation, second uncle called Song's judo coach and informed him that Song would be doing special training with them for a week. He then told Song that after Kenji's training, he'd personally give Song his own special training too. During dinner, Song looked a bit down. Kenji asked if he didn't like the food, but Song said that wasn't it. Then Kenji whispered something to his uncle. When Song was about to leave, Kenji handed him a pack of beef, saying it was for his little sister. Song smiled softly, hoping his sister would like the food. The next day at school, Lee was frantically trying to call Kenji, but he wasn't answering. Her friends noticed how genuinely worried she was. They wondered if maybe Kenji had ended up in the hospital or something. One of them suggested that she visit his house with some of his friends. It had seemed more casual that way. Lee loved the idea and wondered why she hadn't thought of it herself. She called her friend a genius, only to realize she hadn't actually told them anything about Kenji yet. Her friend burst out laughing. Lee waved goodbye and headed off to find Kenji's school buddies. She asked them to come with her, but they refused. They were too busy grinding ranks in their online game. Lee peeked at their ranks, silver and bronze. Smirking, she teased them by saying she was already at platinum. That stung their egos. They demanded her game ID, and when they checked her profile, they were stunned. She wasn't lying. Just then, they spotted Song. Lee walked up to him and asked if he'd come with her to Kenji's place. Song said sure, he was going there anyway. Lee was surprised. She hadn't even mentioned Kenji's name, so how did he know? Laughing, Song said the whole class knew she was worried about Kenji. Lee blushed a little. Meanwhile, Jong and his buddy showed up at a shady pawn shop to sell Kenji's uncle's ring. They were both dressed in suits, trying to look grown up. But the shop was eerily empty. Only one bald man was sitting inside. Jong felt something was off. His friend was already shaking at the sight of the bald guy. Jong also felt a chill. That's when the bald man slowly stood up. Just when they were about to leave the shop, the rest of the gang showed up and locked the doors, trapping both of them inside. Jong completely froze, terrified. Then the camera panned, revealing the bald guy, none other than Kenji's second uncle. The moment Jong and his buddy saw him, their legs turned to jelly. Jong's friend practically started vibrating from fear. Jong shouted at the uncle, demanding why he was picking on him. But the second uncle just stood there, all swag and gangster energy, looking like he walked straight out of an action movie. With a serious face, the second uncle asked Jong if he had any idea who that ring actually belonged to, and without waiting for an answer, slammed a powerful punch into Jong's chest. Jong gasped in pain, barely able to breathe. He quickly confessed that he'd found the ring on the road and was willing to return it. The uncle told him flatly he wasn't going to sell that ring, because its true owner was coming to claim it. Zhang agreed, but even then, the uncle wasn't satisfied. He grabbed Zhang's hair and muttered that it was too long, then called someone over with a trimmer. And the scene cut right there. Meanwhile, we saw Li and Song visiting Kenji's house. One of the uncles opened the door and welcomed them in. Li was shocked by how rich Kenji's house looked and started wondering if Kenji was secretly loaded. Just then, the second uncle noticed Li and casually asked if she was Kenji's girlfriend. Li nervously said no, or at least not yet. Then Kenji came out of the training room, looking completely jacked. His muscles were way bigger than last time. Li practically started hearing wedding bells in her head. Kenji asked Li what she was doing there, and she said she was worried since he hadn't come to school or replied to her messages. She thought maybe he was hospitalized. Then everyone went to the training room. The second uncle asked Li to observe, which confused her a bit. Soon, Kenji and Song prepared for a one-on-one match. Song complimented Kenji, saying he had improved a lot. The second uncle watched and felt proud that training Kenji with kids his own age was clearly working. The fight began. Song grabbed Kenji's collar, and just as Kenji went for a counter-joint attack, Song threw him off with one hand. After training, everyone gathered around the dining table. Li asked Kenji again why he wasn't coming to school or answering messages. Kenji replied that he was doing closed-door training. Song explained that this kind of training meant cutting off all contact and training alone for days. After dinner, the second uncle returned Kenji's phone. Kenji teased Li, saying he wanted to check the messages she'd sent. Embarrassed, Li told him not to read them in front of everyone. Read them later, alone. Kenji agreed. Song noticed this and smiled at Li, who was clearly flustered. The second uncle, watching it all, felt happy seeing Kenji bonding with his friends. He'd never seen this side of Kenji before. After dinner, Li and Song left, still bickering as usual. The second uncle told Kenji to get to bed. He had school tomorrow. The next day, Kenji got ready for school, and as he stepped outside, he was shocked to see multiple cars lined up. His uncle said they'd be dropping him off at school. Kenji suddenly wondered if maybe joining the successor training was a huge mistake. Near the school, the uncle stopped and told Kenji to walk the rest of the way alone. That made Kenji happy. As he walked toward school, he spotted Zhang standing alone in a nearby alley. Kenji smiled at him. Zhang, annoyed, told him to get lost, but Kenji didn't move. He just kept smiling, thinking this was the perfect chance to get the ring back. Kenji walked up and told Zhang to show his hand. Zhang, already stressed, got even more irritated. But Kenji didn't care. His muscles were way more developed now, thanks to 2 weeks of intense training. Suddenly, he grabbed Zhang's hand and slammed a pickaxe punch right into his chest. Zhang tried to fight back, but from a distance, the second uncle gave him a deadly glare and warned him not to take a single step forward or else. That's when Zhang finally realized Kenji had thrown that rock the other day, and the ring was his too. Filled with rage, Zhang punched, but Kenji easily caught his hand and began crushing it like a potato. Zhang screamed in pain and stepped back, thinking, wait, is this really the same loser Kenji? Well, even if he's changed, he's still the same guy, right? Zhang threw another punch, and Kenji thought to himself that Zhang's punches were nothing compared to Song's. Kenji switched into full fight mode. Zhang panicked, he couldn't let himself lose to Kenji. The second uncle stared at Zhang from the alley, silently threatening him. Then came a flashback. Zhang getting his head shaved by the second uncle. Zhang tried to explain they were just high school students, not criminals. But the uncle didn't care, they were students or not, didn't matter. He warned Zhang not to act smart, or he'd kill him. Zhang was so scared, he started crying and agreed to everything. The uncle told him to clean up the place before he left. Back in the present, Zhang thought, if I hit Kenji, that bald guy will kill me. Kenji punched him right in the face, knocking him to the ground. Kenji wondered why Zhang hadn't fought back. Zhang, humiliated, thought about how embarrassing it was to get beat up by a loser. Kenji then offered him a hand to help him up. Zhang asked why he was acting so friendly now. Suddenly, Kenji used the pickaxe move again and snatched the ring from Zhang's hand, slipping it onto his own finger like a boss. Just then, second uncle showed up, clapping his hands and proudly saying, "Young master, I'm proud of you." Kenji blinked and asked when he had arrived. The uncle casually replied that he'd just gotten there and then told Kenji to get in the car. They'd take care of the rest. Zhang stood there, completely confused. Uncle? Young master? Who even was Kenji? Kenji told them the school was right nearby, so there was no need for the car ride. But the uncle insisted today they were going to drop him right at the school gate. Kenji sighed, realizing they really were taking this all the way. Meanwhile, his friends outside the school were freaking out, wondering why so many black cars were parked out front. Some even thought gangsters had shown up. The teachers asked the headmaster what was going on. The headmaster had a feeling and stayed silent. Then all the uncles stepped out of their cars and lined up at the school gate like some mafia ceremony. The students freaked out even more, whispering about gangsters standing right at the entrance. Kenji's friends recognized them from Kenji's house. And then came the grand entrance. Kenji himself walking like a total boss, full of swagger like Doflamingo. Everyone stared in shock. Kenji was the young master of a gangster family? Second uncle watched proudly, thinking, after 17 years, we're finally sending young master to school properly. Kenji's friends were still trying to wrap their heads around it. How could they have known him for so long and not known this? Even his best friend had no idea. As Kenji made his way inside, he bumped into Song and admitted how embarrassed he felt. Song said the entrance was cool, but maybe Kenji should walk a bit more normally next time. Meanwhile, Lee's friends nudged her to go talk to him, since she had even visited his house. Lee happily ran over to Kenji and Song to chat. Kenji's friends watched in shock. Since when was Lee so close to him? One of Kenji's smarter friends felt a little hurt. They'd been friends for 10 years and Kenji never told him. But he figured maybe there was a reason for it. Elsewhere, a female teacher nervously told the senior teacher they had to do something about this situation. They couldn't just let it slide. But the senior teacher was visibly shaken, especially when he saw second uncle staring directly at him. He muttered that they should just leave the area. The female teacher reminded him of his stories about fighting gangsters and winning. He replied, pointing at the bald guy, second uncle, saying he alone was equal to 70 men. This wasn't something he could handle alone. They needed an emergency meeting. We cut to a staff meeting where the head teacher was explaining the situation to the principal. The principal couldn't believe it. Kenji, the kind and well-behaved student, was a gangster's heir? The head teacher added that Kenji's gangster family had basically blocked off the school entrance. Another teacher chimed in, saying she had seen students scared stiff just from looking at those men. They needed to take strict action and get rid of them. One teacher nervously protested, saying that if the gangsters found out the school was trying to act against them, they might come after the staff. Then the principal spoke up. He said no one should judge a student just by appearances. He'd call Kenji and talk to him directly, and warned them not to speak badly about him. But the chief teacher argued, saying he knew people like that, and that such types were dangerous for society. He questioned how they could allow gangsters into a school. The principal defended Kenji, saying he'd never done anything wrong and was a role model to many students. He was the pride of the school and also the student council president for the next term, with a list of achievements and certificates. But the head teacher interrupted, saying, "You may want to protect Kenji, but we can't save a plant whose roots are already rotten." That left the principal stressed. He asked what they wanted him to do. The head teacher calmly replied that before the rest of the students started acting like Kenji, they needed to transfer him to another school. The other teachers were shocked, and the scene ended there. Then we cut to the rooftop where a girl was talking to a guy named Hyung, telling him that Kenji was from a gangster family. Hyung found it hard to believe. He was also a student council president. The girl, who was the vice president, asked him why he didn't look surprised. Did he already know? Hyung replied that he had no clue and had just found out himself. So yeah, Kenji was officially the young master of a gangster family. The vice president looked at Hyung and asked how Kenji managed to hide his status so well from everyone. More importantly, she reminded him, Kenji was about to become the next student council president. They had to do something. Hyung thought for a moment and said maybe Kenji didn't fake being kind just to cover up his gangster background. Maybe he really was a kind person. But still, what if other schools found out? Their school was seen as a role model by others. Their reputation would be ruined. He decided it was time to speak to Kenji directly. Cut to Kenji entering the classroom, where one kid, the same one Kenji almost fought before, immediately stood up and started hurling insults. The rest of the class began whispering that something always felt off. He was just too kind. Only psychos act that sweet. Another student warned everyone to hush up or Kenji might beat them up too. One of Sujin's friends asked if she had known about any of this, and she said she hadn't had a clue. Kenji heard it all, growing more and more disturbed. His mind flashed back to the days when everyone used to thank him for his kindness and shower him with praise. And now, those same people were calling him dangerous. Someone muttered that Kenji was glaring at them like a real gangster. Lee and Song appeared just then and asked why he wasn't going inside. Kenji looked completely crushed. Song asked if he was okay, but Kenji just held his face and bolted toward the bathroom. As he ran, he remembered something his first uncle had once said. It takes years to build a good reputation and just seconds to destroy it. Being kind is hard, but turning bad is easy. Kenji regretted not taking that advice seriously. Then he ran into his best friends. But they were angry, hurt that he never told them the truth. They ignored him and walked away. Kenji broke down crying and begged them to stop. One of them snapped, asking why he was acting so fake. Kenji tried to explain that he had his reasons, but was cut off. His friends said he didn't believe Kenji when he said he wanted to be like Jong. But now it all made sense, because he was a gangster's son. Kenji insisted he was just about to tell them, but his friend shouted that he should have never hung out with someone like him in the first place. He had even suspected Kenji's uncle was shady but brushed it off. Turns out he was right. Kenji admitted his uncle was a gangster, but he wasn't. The friend yelled at him to shut up. He didn't care what Kenji claimed, he was a gangster now. Even Kenji's smartest friend, the one who always stood by him, said Kenji should have at least told him. Then came a flashback to 3 years ago. Kenji and his best friend watching the news, where a gang called the Hidden Dragon had been busted. 17 members were arrested, all around 20 years old. His friend said he hated people like that, the ones who ruined society. Kenji silently prayed the news wouldn't mention his family, and nervously asked if his friend really hated gangsters. His friend replied, "Everyone hates them, don't you?" Kenji tried to say something but couldn't. Back in the present, he said he wanted to tell them, he just never found the right moment. His friend scoffed, saying, 10 years and not a single chance? That's when Song and Lee showed up. Song said Kenji had left class suddenly, so they came to check on him. Seeing them, Kenji's friend sneered, "Look, your real friends are here. Lee the bully and Song the top fighter. Guess we were never good enough." Then they walked away. Song and Lee stood there, confused by what was going on. Kenji couldn't take it anymore. He fell to his knees and cried. Lee asked what was wrong with those losers and why they were acting like that. But Kenji was in too much shock to respond. Later, we saw him sitting behind the school building. Song asked if he was feeling better after getting some fresh air. Kenji didn't answer. Lee asked if he had any idea something like this would happen, because he wasn't acting like himself. Kenji asked if smoking made people feel better. Song and Lee quickly told him not to even try. Kenji questioned why Lee could smoke, but he couldn't. She replied that it just didn't suit him. Kenji bitterly laughed and said it did suit him now. He was the son of a gangster, after all. He went on, saying everyone now wanted to avoid him just because of who his family was. Maybe he should start acting like a bad person. He pointed at Lee and said she was no angel either. She used to bully people. Lee told him not to talk like that. She said she only had to quit smoking, and she was doing it now. Then she dropped her cigarette. Song stepped in and told Kenji to get a grip. Smoking would only hurt him and make things worse. Kenji asked why everyone was treating him like a villain when all he ever did was try to help them. Lee told him if people wanted to think he was a gangster, let them, why should he care? But Kenji felt it was going too far. He didn't understand how people could change so suddenly. Song reminded him that he knew what he was getting into. He'd made up his mind to harden his heart for this. Kenji whispered that he couldn't even control himself anymore. Then his phone rang. It was the student council president, calling for an urgent meeting. Kenji thanked Song and Lee for talking to him and walked off. We cut to the school terrace. The president was waiting for him. When Kenji arrived, he asked why he'd been called. The president came straight to the point. "Are you really a gangster, son?" Kenji replied, "Does it matter?" The president said yes, it mattered a lot. Could ruin the school's image and change the whole environment. He added that it was still hard to believe someone as kind as Kenji came from a gangster family. Kenji had planned to speak with the teacher after their conversation, but now he felt there was no need. With a cold tone, he told the president to do whatever he wanted. The president, a bit surprised, said Kenji wasn't always like this. That's when Kenji, frustrated, snapped back. He reminded him that for 10 long years, he had lived as a kind, helpful student. But the moment people found out he was the son of a gangster, they started treating him like an outcast. Punching the wall in anger, he said he no longer cared if he became student council president or not. Let them do whatever they wanted. The president then questioned him, asking if he really wanted to follow his family's footsteps and carry forward the gangster business. Hearing that, Kenji's face dropped. The president added that if that was the case, he might as well stop coming to school. It would be better for the school environment. Kenji simply replied that he would do what he felt like and walked away. Left alone, the president thought to himself that Kenji was still a kind person, just angry because of the way people had treated him after learning about his family. He sensed trouble brewing in the school and realized a storm might be on its way. But then an idea struck. If they used Kenji wisely, maybe they could get rid of all the delinquents in school. Meanwhile, in a different scene, Kenji's uncle was beating up Jong. He warned him to leave the school if he wanted to stay alive. He told Jong he should have picked an opponent of his own level. Jong, terrified, apologized. As Kenji's other uncle approached, he asked if they should beat him more. But the bald uncle replied that there was no benefit in harming the boy any further. They still had to welcome their Hyungnim, so they had to move quickly. While leaving, they warned Jong that if he tried anything clever, it could cost him his life. Shaken and bruised, Jong thought Kenji was just acting brave because of his gangster backup. He believed that without them, Kenji was nothing and that he could easily knock him down with a single punch. He became determined to get his revenge. Jong realized he needed to find Kenji's weakness, and then it hit him. Susan. She had once told him that she and Kenji were childhood friends. Jong quickly dialed her number, thinking she probably still liked him. He just needed to sweet-talk her and get some information. As Susan saw Jong's call, she left the classroom, pretending she had to go to the bathroom. Her friend reminded her that class was about to start, but Susan insisted and walked out. Outside the school, Song and Lee were having a conversation. Lee asked if Kenji had gotten into a fight with his friends, but Song wasn't sure. Lee found it ridiculous that everyone was now treating Kenji like a villain and creating drama early in the morning. Song admitted Kenji didn't deserve any of this. Lee, visibly annoyed, said she used to think his friends were decent, but now they were just making her angry. Did they have a death wish trying to mess with Kenji? Just then, Lee's friends showed up and greeted Song, who greeted them back. They asked if Kenji was around, and Lee said he was in an important meeting. One of the girls asked how Lee knew that Kenji was a gangster. Was it just a gut feeling? Or did she already know? Song awkwardly said he should get going and walked off as they said goodbye. While walking away, Song was deep in thought when he spotted Kenji's best friend, Yoon. He walked up, sat beside him, and greeted him. Yoon was surprised that Song was talking to him. Song admitted he didn't know why Yoon and Kenji fought, but reminded him that Kenji wasn't the only one being avoided. Almost the entire school had turned their backs on him. Yoon replied bitterly, asking why Kenji never told him the truth. They had been childhood friends, even went to kindergarten together. He felt betrayed. Song calmly asked if Yoon had ever considered that Kenji might have had his reasons for keeping it a secret, and maybe he should ask Kenji directly. Yoon paused, thinking. Song then added that Kenji had spent his whole childhood helping others. But just imagine, if people had known he was a gangster's son back then, would they have still treated him kindly? Yoon admitted that Song probably didn't fear Kenji because he was strong, unlike him, a loser. Song chuckled and said he was scared too. Not of Kenji, but of his uncles. Even though he hadn't known Kenji for long, he could tell he was a good guy. Yoon, being his childhood friend, should know that even better. Yoon felt regret hit him hard. He realized he had misunderstood Kenji and let his anger cloud his judgment. He remembered all the hurtful things he had said. Kenji had never thought badly of him. He knew what he had to do now, find Kenji and apologize. With that, he stood up and walked back into class. Back in class, Yoon returned and saw that the other boys had moved his desk away from Kenji's. They told him he didn't need to sit near that gangster anymore. But Yoon replied calmly that it was fine. He wanted to sit next to Kenji. He needed to apologize. One of his friends looked surprised and asked why he would say sorry to someone who had lied to him for 10 years and betrayed his trust. But Yoon insisted that there had clearly been a misunderstanding, and he wanted to ask Kenji about it directly. His friend warned him that if he kept defending Kenji, he'd get into serious trouble. And if that happened, their friendship would be over. Before Yoon could say anything more, a couple of bullies from another class barged in. One of them smacked a student on the head and loudly announced that he'd heard there was a gangster's son in this class and wanted to meet him, complaining that the class was full of silent dummies. He cursed Ijong for always disappearing when something important was happening and said even Song wasn't around. He then asked where Lee had gone to. As they grumbled, they told the silent class to inform the gangster's son that they had come looking for him. Just as they were about to leave, they ran into Song standing by the door. The moment they saw him, both bullies froze, turned quiet, and slipped away without another word. Song narrowed his eyes, wondering what those punks were doing in his class. He peeked inside and, seeing everything was fine, sighed. Meanwhile, we shift to Jong's minions, who were nervously discussing their next move. One of them said he had no choice but to attend school today. If he skipped again, things could get messy. But the other warned him to be more concerned about whether anyone was following him. The boy laughed, thinking it was nonsense. Why would anyone follow him? It became clear that this one didn't yet know the truth about Kenji's gangster background or his uncle's. The other boy, now very worried, explained that Jong had picked a fight with the wrong person. That ring Jong found? It belonged to a gangster. The clueless one casually suggested selling the ring and settling the issue. But the other snapped that it wasn't so easy. He and Jong had tried to sell it, but the gangsters caught them and beat them up badly. Now terrified, he said maybe they should go to the police since the gangsters were adults and they were still minors. But even that didn't feel safe. He was convinced they might be killed if they tried reporting anything. His heart was racing just thinking about it. He begged his friend not to drag him further into this mess. He had nothing to do with that ring, and the gangsters hadn't touched him. Still, his friend scolded him for being such a coward. He insisted that who got involved didn't matter anymore. He just wanted his friend to stay alert. Then he mumbled, wondering what Jong was even up to right now. The scene cut to Susan walking through a narrow alleyway, where she found Jong sitting alone on the ground. Seeing his bruised face, she asked if he was okay. Jong, bitter and tired, asked if she knew Kenji was a gangster heir. Susan was taken aback and said she had only found out today. Jong, annoyed, reminded her that she and Kenji had been childhood friends. Shouldn't she have known? Susan apologized, and Jong went on to explain that Kenji had called 10 of his uncles to beat him up. In his mind, Jong wondered if she'd even believe his story. Susan was shocked to hear this and found it hard to believe that Kenji would do something so harsh. She said it didn't sound like the Kenji she knew. She found it all hard to accept. Jong, twisting the story further, called Kenji a coward and then suddenly asked if she knew any of Kenji's weaknesses. Susan was confused and asked why he was even bringing that up. She said she didn't know of any. Jong pushed further, suggesting there had to be something. A secret about his uncles or maybe something valuable to him. Susan, thinking hard, replied that as far as she knew, there wasn't anything like that. Jong teased her again, pointing out that even as a childhood friend, she hadn't known about his gangster background or any of his vulnerabilities. Susan paused and then said softly, if there's anything Kenji truly cared about, it was her. Jong looked at her for a second and thought to himself, now this was going to be interesting. He got up to leave, but Susan grabbed his arm and asked if he was all right, offering to call an ambulance. Jong refused, saying he was going home. He mentioned he had dropped his cap when the gangsters beat him, and now he needed to go back to get it. Then, looking at her, he asked if she wanted to come with him. While walking together, Susan turned to Jong and asked softly if they were dating again. Jong paused for a moment, then placed his hand on her head with a gentle smile and said of course. They were back together. He apologized for the way he had treated her, saying he hadn't realized how good she was. He asked for another chance to prove himself. Susan, blushing and happy, nodded and cheerfully walked beside him. She then teased him, asking what happened to his hair. Jong replied that it was just too hot lately, so he shaved it off. Jong then looked at the time and asked if Susan shouldn't head back to class. Susan shrugged it off, saying she'd sneak in through the back gate. Jong smiled and said that worked. Susan then suggested they go to the K-restaurant after school since it had been a while. Jong agreed with a nod, but in his mind, he thought Susan was the perfect bait to trap Kenji. The scene shifted to Lee and her friends. One of them curiously asked if she was dating Kenji. Lee quickly denied it. Her friend smirked and asked how she knew Kenji was a gangster's son. She seemed way too good at gathering information. Lee brushed it off, but the friend teased her, reminding her how she always dreamed of marrying a gangster. Annoyed, Lee snapped that it wasn't like that. The friend, a bit scared, apologized, saying she understood Lee didn't like Kenji, but wondered why she was getting so worked up. Lee calmed down and admitted she did like Kenji, but not because he was a gangster. That made her friend grin and say that now that Kenji was officially a gangster, it was a bonus. She encouraged Lee to bring him closer to the bullies. That way he'd become more popular. Lee replied that Kenji was strong, and she liked strong guys. Her mind wandered off into a fantasy where Kenji growled in true gangster fashion, declaring he'd take over the school, and her too. The thought made her giggle. Suddenly, two bullies approached and asked where her half-gangster was, clearly referring to Kenji. Lee wondered why they were suddenly so interested in him. The bullies said they were talking about the same gangster who was in her class. Lee's friend whispered that maybe they were trying to get close to Kenji to ride his popularity. One of the bullies smirked and said there was nothing wrong with getting close. They were classmates, after all. Lee questioned their sudden interest in Kenji and asked when they even became friends with him. In her mind, she thought that maybe this small group could form around Kenji. It could be a good thing. But then she doubted herself. Was she doing the right thing? What would Kenji think of all this? One bully asked again where Kenji was and added that they didn't care about her. They just wanted to find Jong. Lee replied sharply, asking why they were asking her about their own friend. As they turned to leave, they found Kenji standing right behind them. Both bullies looked at him, confused, and asked who he was. Lee's friend pointed at him and said, "That's the gangster you were looking for." The bully looked him up and down and scoffed. He said Kenji looked like a total loser. Introducing himself as Big Head from Class 6, he held out his hand for a shake. Kenji didn't move. The silence felt awkward. The other bully tried to keep it light and said they should talk like friends. Didn't gangsters know how to shake hands? Kenji finally spoke, asking if they were Jong's friends. The bully nodded and said it was nice to meet another one of Jong's friends. He offered a handshake again, but this time Kenji grabbed it and didn't let go. Instead, he crushed it tightly. The boy screamed in pain, and his friend got defensive, asking why he was acting like a child. The first bully yelled at him to take it seriously and remove Kenji's grip. The second bully raised his hand to punch Kenji, but Kenji caught it easily and said that punching others wasn't a good habit. Then, with a twist, he turned the bully's hand like a potato screw. The boy cried out and surrendered immediately. Kenji warned them that if he used even a little more strength, their bones would snap. Both bullies collapsed, holding their hands and shoulders in pain. Lee's friends watched in shock. One of them finally understood how Kenji had defeated Jong. But crushing Big Head so easily, that was next level. They whispered to each other in disbelief. And Lee, well, she was lost in admiration, blushing and smiling like she'd just watched her dream man in action. She walked up to Kenji and asked if he was okay. Kenji nodded and said he had a question. He asked whether those two were Jong's friends and also bullies. Then, looking straight at Lee, he added that she was a bully too. Lee quietly admitted it was true. Kenji smirked and said that was great. He asked her to let all the other bullies know that, apart from her, he planned to wipe the floor with every one of them. Lee, clearly flattered, agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, Susan was speaking to Jong again. She offered to talk to Kenji, thinking maybe that would stop his uncles from harassing Jong. Jong looked offended and asked if she thought he was being bullied by Kenji. Susan clarified that she believed he was strong, but asked how he could take on gangster uncles all alone. Jong, giving her a small smile, said he didn't have to. He just needed her to stay by his side. Susan happily agreed and started walking with Jong when suddenly his bully friends, whom Kenji had recently taught a harsh lesson, showed up. The moment they arrived, one of them asked what had happened to Jong's face. Jong quickly told Susan to head to class, and as she walked away, she told him she'd make up some excuse for his absence. While walking, she thought Jong always looked cooler when he was with his friends. Back with the guys, Jong asked who did this to them. Was it Song? They shook their heads and said it wasn't Song, but Kenji. Jong was confused. Kenji? That loser-looking guy? His friends confirmed it, saying that despite his looks, Kenji was surprisingly strong. Jong couldn't believe it. He got beaten up by Kenji, not Song? He asked if Kenji had brought his uncles along. His friends were even more confused. What uncles? Kenji did this all by himself. Still not buying it, Jong said he could accept Kenji defeating him, but how did Big Head lose? Something didn't feel right. His friends grew annoyed and asked Jong to stop questioning them and explain who messed him up. Was it Kenji too? Jong snapped, saying he didn't lose to that loser, but to over 10 gangster uncles who jumped him together. The boys were shocked. Over 10 gangsters? Jong smirked and added that even those gangsters weren't the real problem. Kenji was messing with their heads, and it was time to end his game. His friends hesitated. They were terrified. How could they fight someone backed by actual gangsters? Jong suggested they ask Park Do for help. One of them recalled a rumor that Park Do became a gangster after high school. Jong explained Park Do was the kind of crazy who didn't care who he fought. Rumor had it, he even fought real gangsters in his first year. His friends actually liked the idea. Jong decided to speak to Park Do alone and promised to take full responsibility if things went south. He told them to gather as many people as possible. With a smug grin, Jong declared he wanted to beat Kenji with his own 2 hands. Then the scene shifted to a convenience store, where Kenji and Lee were shopping. Lee was about to buy mint chocolate milk. Kenji, a bit puzzled, asked if she really liked that stuff. Lee said no, it was for him. Kenji was even more confused. He didn't even like it. That's when Lee suddenly remembered Kenji's friend had told her about his preferences. She then asked what happened to all the snacks she brought him in the hospital. Kenji, still clueless, said he never got anything. So Lee asked what he actually liked, and they both sat down for a proper chat. Lee said she'd tell him everything about the bullies in their school and in neighboring schools. Kenji was all ears. Lee began with Park Do. He was in 3rd year, and what Kenji didn't know was that Park Do was actually her older brother. Song, as Kenji already knew, was a top fighter and a judo player in the school's judo club. Since Song and Park Do were close, Song kept a low profile and stayed away from bullies. That's why her brother was more well-known than Song. Kenji was stunned. Park Do was her brother? Lee continued, telling him that Jong had gone to the same middle school as her brother, which is how they became friends. There was also another 3rd-year student named Hyan who was in their circle. So Jong wasn't on top because he was a great fighter, it was because he hung around with her brother. Jong's gang had 11 members, including him. And nearby schools like Mujin High, Majin High, and Sangneum High had teamed up to form a huge gang with over 1,000 members. The top dog at Sangneum High was Park Myong-jun. Hearing all this, Kenji interrupted and said she didn't need to go any further. First, they had to clean up their own school before worrying about the others. Lee asked if he was okay. Kenji confidently said he was fine, and he would beat up all the bullies and become the ultimate bad guy. Meanwhile, the school president was seen talking to Park Do. He mentioned that the junior he once admired turned out to be a gangster. Park Do reminded him that he had warned him last year to watch out for the first years, especially since members of the Fire Bear Gang had shown up at the school ceremony. But the president admitted he hadn't believed him back then. If he were in Park Do's place, he would have thought it was a joke too. Park Do raised an eyebrow and asked if it never seemed strange that while every other school had constant fights, their school remained calm. The president said he thought it was because their school had a good reputation. The school president casually said he thought everything stayed peaceful because he was the president. But Park Do shook his head and told him that wasn't the reason. It was because they were standing in the eye of a tornado, and that tornado was Kenji. As he walked away, Park Do smirked and said nothing interesting had happened in the past year. But now, the real fun was about to begin. The scene shifted to 2 boys playing 8-ball pool. One of their phones buzzed with a message from Jong, asking everyone to gather urgently. Soon, messages from Jong began popping up on phones all over, as every gang member paused to think about heading out. Then we saw Jong waiting on the rooftop. As Park Do arrived, he asked why Jong had called him there. Park Do said he came because he heard Jong had something to say, and he didn't want any interruptions between them. But first, he looked at Jong and asked what had happened to his face. Jong tried to brush it off, but Park Do smacked him on the head and asked why he was wearing a cap. Jong hesitated and said not to make him take it off. But when he finally did, he nervously warned Park Do not to laugh. Too late. Park Do burst out laughing. He asked why Jong had shaved his head. He was just joking when he told him to do it. Then his tone turned serious. He demanded to know who dared to hit his little brother. Jong told him it was that loser Kenji, the gangster son everyone in their class talked about. Park Do nodded. He'd heard all the gossip. No one had imagined that sweet-looking kid was actually a young gangster heir. Jong admitted he had smacked Kenji a little because he was talking too much, but then his gangster uncles jumped him and did all this damage. Park Do raised an eyebrow. Was he sure it wasn't Kenji who did the beating? Jong scoffed. How could that loser beat him? Park Do let it go and asked what Jong really wanted to talk about. Jong finally confessed. He wanted to take Kenji down, but those gangster uncles and Song kept protecting him. It was driving him crazy. Park Do said, "So that's your problem? Just his uncles and Song?" Jong nodded and said he wanted Park Do's support. Park Do agreed. If Jong planned to fight Kenji at school, Song would definitely interfere. But he told Jong not to worry about the uncles. He had connections that reached all the way to the top. That made Jong light up with excitement. Then Park Do asked what to do about Song. Jong pointed out that Song was also in the judo club with him. Park Do waved it off. Song wasn't more important than him. He'd take care of the uncles, and since Kenji was a loser, they'd handle him later. First, they had to clip his wings. He laid out the plan. Jong would challenge Song to a one-on-one fight and bring him to the gym. Jong wasn't confident, though. He wasn't sure he'd win even if he got Song there. Park Do smirked. That's why they'd need to use a trick. If they could get Song into the gym and hit him with a surprise attack, even he wouldn't see it coming. Jong laughed and asked when they'd do it. Park Do said not to rush. They'd go for it during lunch tomorrow. Jong was told to gather all his gang members just in case. As Park Do walked away, he warned Jong not to keep getting beat up. He was like a little brother to him, and it hurt his heart to see him like this. Once Park Do left, Jong muttered to himself, "Song, you're finished tomorrow." Meanwhile, Jong's gang members were already gathered and getting annoyed. One grumbled that Jong still hadn't shown up after urgently calling them. Another reminded him they'd only been waiting for 5 minutes and to chill out. A third one joked that if Jong didn't arrive in 10 minutes, they'd play their 5th round of pool. Finally, Jong showed up and announced he had good news. The group warned him if it wasn't truly important, he'd get beaten up. Jong dropped the bomb. Tomorrow they were going to beat up Song. Everyone stared at him like he was crazy. Song? Was he out of his mind? Jong insisted they trust him. All they had to do was follow his plan. Park Do was going to help them too. That caught their attention. After all, Song and Park Do were close friends. If Park Do was on their side, maybe this was possible. Jong hyped them up, saying they could take out all their anger on Song. He acted like he was better than everyone just because he could fight. But tomorrow they'd show him his place. They all hated Song anyway, right? Tomorrow it ends. Meanwhile, Song was shown dozing off in his classroom, completely unaware of what was being plotted. Back with Kenji and Lee, Lee was quietly thinking to herself. Kenji had said he'd get rid of all the school bullies. Did that mean he'd even fight her brother? If that happened, Kenji could actually become the strongest guy in the whole school. Kenji noticed her lost in thought and asked what she was thinking about. Did she want to say something? Lee quickly shook her head. Just then, Kenji's best friend, Yoon, appeared at the school gate. Lee smiled and told Kenji that maybe Yoon wanted to talk to him. She said she'd leave first. Yoon asked Kenji if they could talk, and Kenji agreed. The two of them stepped outside the school and sat together on a bench. For a while, neither of them said a word. Then Yoon broke the silence, telling Kenji that he was upset. Kenji nodded, saying he understood why. He apologized and confessed the truth. He was the son of a gangster. He knew how much Yoon hated gangsters, and that's why he had kept it a secret. Yoon admitted he was shocked when he found out about Kenji's family background, but that wasn't what he was angry about. What hurt more was that Kenji hadn't told him personally. Instead, he found out from someone else. Didn't Kenji think hiding something that big for 10 years was too much? Kenji apologized again and explained he had wanted to tell him, but he held back because of Yoon's hatred for gangsters. Hearing that, Yoon laughed a little and said that actually made him feel better. He was starting to think Kenji had changed. Kenji smiled and said if Yoon was laughing, that meant they were friends again and he wouldn't ignore him anymore. Yoon raised an eyebrow and teased that it was Kenji who'd been ignoring him ever since he became a bully. Kenji gave Yoon a gentle punch on the arm and said he could never ignore his best friend. Yoon, still playful, asked why Kenji had hit him that day and hit him twice in return. Kenji protested that he only hit once. Why did Yoon hit him twice? Yoon replied it was because Kenji had hit him harder. The two burst out laughing and started playfully wrestling like old times. From the classroom window, Song watched them and smiled, glad to see the misunderstanding between them finally cleared. Later in class, Kenji told Yoon he wanted to invite him home and introduce him to his uncle. Another classmate noticed they were friends again and wondered how they patched things up so quickly. Meanwhile, sitting next to him, Sangu was fuming. He remembered how Kenji had taken his money earlier. That gangster? He swore he'd never talk to Kenji. Was Yoon crazy or blind? Kenji's other friend looked at Sangu, annoyed. This guy wasn't even really his friend. Maybe it was time to go talk to Kenji instead. When school ended, Kenji and Yoon started walking home together. Song joined them shortly after, and Lee ran over, asking them to wait. She wanted to walk with them too. Seeing this, Susan felt a sharp sting of jealousy. Then Kenji's second friend shouted from behind, asking if he could join as well. Kenji happily said yes, and they all started walking home together. From a distance, Sangu watched bitterly. Damn it, he thought. First Kenji stole his money. Now he was stealing his friends too. That guy just kept taking things from him. The group was shown walking together when one of them asked if it was really okay for all of them to suddenly show up at Kenji's house. Song said it seemed fine to him. Outside Kenji's house, first uncle was already waiting, thinking to himself that young master must be arriving soon. As the group approached, Kenji greeted his uncle loudly, and his friends respectfully followed suit. First uncle smiled, impressed that Kenji had made new friends and looked genuinely happy. It warmed his heart. Kenji introduced him to the group, saying he was the oldest uncle of them all. Then he suggested they head inside and eat something. But first uncle gently reminded him that today was the start of his special training and the tea party would have to wait. Kenji's smile faded. Special training? First uncle added that starting tomorrow, Kenji wouldn't be going to school. The training would begin in full swing. Kenji was disappointed and asked if he really couldn't go to school at all. Song chuckled and said, "Looks like the next time we see you, you'll be even stronger." Lee also said goodbye and one by one everyone left. Kenji waved them off, promising to stay in touch this time. Then first uncle said it was time to go. Kenji noticed a fresh injury on his uncle and asked how he got it. Was there really someone strong enough to hurt him? First uncle nodded seriously. There were still a few people stronger than him. Elsewhere, Zhang's two goons were watching everything from a distance, wearing masks. One of them whispered that Kenji wouldn't be coming to school from tomorrow. The other one grinned. That meant the gangster uncles wouldn't be around either. It was the perfect chance to attack Song. They decided to follow him and find out where he lived. One of them asked why Zhang was so obsessed with beating Song. What was the point? But still, they began tailing him. The scene cut, and the next morning we saw Song heading to school. He was thinking about how peaceful the school felt today. Of course, Kenji wasn't there. Song walked into his classroom, placed his bag on the desk, and smiled to himself as he looked at it. "This desk is perfect," he mumbled before immediately dozing off like nothing in the world could bother him. Meanwhile, Zhang was receiving an update from his two goons. They confirmed that Kenji wouldn't be coming to school today. One of them nervously asked if they'd really be able to take down Song. Sure, Park Do was backing them, but Song was no ordinary guy. Zhang, however, reassured them confidently. Park Do wasn't their only help. Some allies would join too. In his head, he was already celebrating Song's last day. Soon after, Zhang entered the classroom. Lee and her friends were stunned, wondering why he had shaved his head and why he was walking straight towards Song. Trembling, Zhang raised his hand and smacked Song on the back of the neck, then shouted at him to meet in the gym if he had any guts. The whole class gasped in disbelief. Song looked furious, but Zhang ran off in a panic, yelling that if Song didn't follow him, it meant he was scared. Song didn't react at all, staying calm. Zhang, now speeding through the hallway, muttered to himself that once Song entered the gym, he'd show him who the real boss was. A flashback played, showing Park Do instructing Zhang to just bring Song to the gym. He'd handle the rest with their allied thugs. Zhang had practically begged for help, hands together in desperation. Park Do simply told him to focus on how he wanted to finish Song. Zhang arrived at the gym glancing around. "Where the heck is he?" he muttered. But what he saw instead were his gang buddies and 4 muscular seniors standing on the sidelines, each from different schools, all part of Park Do's alliance. Then came the introductions. Huang, from Mujin High, Park Do from Jiren High, Do-won, from Meijin High, Myung-jun, from Sangneum High. These 4 were known collectively as the super delinquents. Zhang grinned at Park Do, who gave him a playful wink. Zhang felt confident. Everything was in place. Now they just needed Song to walk through that door. Huang looked over and asked, "Wait, isn't that just Zhang? I came here thinking the Fire Bear Gang's successor would show up." Park Do told him to wait. The main character always enters late. Another senior joked about how weak the current top school delinquents were and asked one, the bald guy, for his opinion. One snapped that he didn't come here to joke around. He came to meet the Fire Bear successor. Things briefly got tense. Meanwhile, Song stood up from his desk, muttering that it was time to head to the gym. Lee tried to stop him, telling him to ignore Zhang, but Song walked off. As he entered the gym, Zhang spotted him and shouted, "Song, today's your last day." The seniors watched with interest, realizing this was the same Song Chul Park Do always talked about. Park Do nodded and added that even though Song seemed strong, he refused to join their gang. The energy in the room shifted. Zhang's own friends began sweating and stayed silent, unsure of what to do. Zhang yelled at them to attack, but no one moved. He began panicking. "Where the heck are my guys?" Just then, Song stepped forward. Zhang backed away, shouting, "Don't come near me." But Song walked right up to him and, without hesitation, landed a solid punch to his face. Zhang crashed to the ground, scraping along the floor. His friends were frozen in fear. The seniors stared in awe. Was this kid really a high schooler? His strength was terrifying. Zhang stumbled to his feet, groaning that his nose might be broken. He screamed at everyone again to attack. But still, no one moved. He looked to Park Do and begged for a signal. "You said you'd help me." Park Do smirked and said casually, "You want a signal? All right, here it comes." Just then, a door beside him creaked open slowly, grabbing everyone's attention. To everyone's shock, Kenji stepped out. Zhang's face drained of color. He stammered, completely thrown off. What is he doing here?" Kenji walked in without rushing, his face calm as ever. He looked directly at Zhang and said coolly that if Zhang wanted a beating, he didn't need to drag Song into it. Kenji alone would have been more than enough. The entire gym turned silent, all eyes now fixed on Kenji. Zhang stood frozen, his thoughts racing. Wasn't Kenji supposed to be absent today? His guys promised he wouldn't show. If Kenji was here, then their plan to corner Song had already fallen apart. Panicked, Zhang turned to Park Do, hoping for backup. But Kenji shook his head and sighed. "This guy really likes to talk. What's wrong? Scared to fight me?" Zhang snapped, yelling that Kenji was a loser who always called in his gangster uncles to save him. But Kenji didn't have time for that nonsense. With a sharp tone, he said, "Enough," and launched himself forward. Zhang came charging too, but Kenji, without missing a beat, used the same old pickaxe technique, slamming his hand right into Zhang's chest. Zhang staggered, eyes wide. "Not again. He's using that move again." Kenji smirked and said that what Zhang just felt was grip strength. Boiling with rage, Zhang cursed and threw a wild punch, but Kenji slipped past it like it was nothing. In one swift move, he grabbed Zhang's arm and clamped down, his grip tightening like a vice. Zhang screamed as pain shot through him. Kenji twisted his arm effortlessly, like he was wringing out a towel. Zhang was clearly shaken now. Kenji glared at him and said he didn't even want to see his face anymore, then landed a solid strike right on Zhang's neck. Song, watching from the side, thought the move wasn't bad at all. The seniors nearby nodded in approval, impressed by Kenji's fighting style. One of them whispered that this must be the successor of the Fire Bear Gang. Zhang, desperate to save face, shouted that he was already injured from fighting Song earlier and that this wasn't a fair fight. Kenji scoffed and dismissed his excuse. That's when Zhang suddenly pulled a knife from his pocket, grinning like a maniac, saying now things would get interesting. Kenji's confidence dipped a little as he saw the blade. He muttered that this was going too far. Zhang taunted him, saying he looked scared and that today was his last day alive. But just as he charged forward, a calm voice echoed from the stage, "Hello, mic test." Zhang froze mid-step, confused if it was a teacher. Then, to everyone's surprise, Kenji's bald second uncle stepped into view and calmly asked everyone to pause the fight. He reminded them that using weapons in a one-on-one was strictly against the rules and told Zhang to drop the knife. Zhang was irritated and muttered, "What's this bald guy doing here?" The uncle laughed and suggested they restart the fight, but this time like real men, no weapons, no excuses. He warned Zhang again to throw the knife, or he'd be forced to come down himself. Just then, the camera cut to Zhang's two goons sitting quietly nearby, also completely bald. Apparently, the uncle had already taken care of them too. Still, Zhang refused to drop the knife. The uncle gave a final warning, saying he hoped Zhang would do the right thing or else he'd be forced to make him. Zhang started sweating. He wondered if those two fools had told the uncle everything. Still clinging to excuses, Zhang complained again, claiming he'd already taken a critical hit from Song and had a broken nose. So this wasn't fair. Then his eyes caught the sight of the two bald guys, and after squinting for a second, he realized they were his own henchmen. Suddenly, he remembered the uncle's warning. If he pulled even a single dirty trick, he'd be shaved bald again, every single time until he died. Zhang sighed and admitted to himself that his life was already a mess, so he might as well go all in. That's when Kenji stepped in and asked Song to punch him, just like he had punched Zhang. Song was confused, asking if that was really necessary. Kenji nodded seriously, saying it was the only way for this to be a fair fight. Song agreed and gave Kenji a strong punch that made even the second uncle tense up a bit. The senior delinquents watching were impressed, praising Kenji's spirit. Kenji then said now they were even, so Zhang better not come up with any more lame excuses. Zhang was stunned by Kenji's fairness. In the crowd, Hyun said Kenji seemed more suited to lead this school now. He had real guts. Park Do agreed, glancing over at the bald uncle. Back in the ring, Kenji told Zhang that if he wouldn't come to him, he'd just go instead, and charged forward. Zhang tried to step back, but Kenji leaped at him, grabbed both his hands and pinned him down. Zhang cursed and told him to let go. Song observed quietly, saying Kenji had completely overpowered Zhang. It was clearly Kenji's win, but the second uncle looked puzzled. He thought to himself that he'd never even taught Kenji any grappling techniques. The seniors were confused too. Kenji had the upper hand, so why wasn't he landing punches? Kenji was also thinking the same. He had pinned Zhang, but now what? So, he started twisting Zhang's hands slowly. Song tilted his head, a bit disappointed. He thought Kenji might be using some new martial arts move, but nope, he was just holding his hands awkwardly. The uncle sighed, thinking Kenji should have at least used the potato twister move. Zhang screamed in pain as Kenji twisted harder. Kenji's eyes welled up with tears. He remembered everything. How Zhang had bullied him, stolen his money, beaten him, taken Susan away, and even laid hands on her. Through clenched teeth, Kenji called Zhang a bad guy. Zhang shouted that it felt like his arm was going to break. He begged Kenji to let go and said he admitted defeat. But Kenji wasn't done. He asked how Zhang could give up so easily after doing all that, then released his grip only to start punching Zhang's face. Zhang cried out that he couldn't move his arms anymore. The crowd watched silently. Kenji asked him how it felt to be beaten like a dog and not even be able to defend himself. With one final punch, Kenji told him that without his gang around, Zhang was nothing. He grabbed Zhang by the collar and asked who the real bad guy was now. Song stepped in just then and stopped Kenji, saying it was enough. Zhang looked unconscious. Kenji still had tears in his eyes. Hyun, watching from the side, asked why Kenji was crying if he was the one beating Zhang. One of the strongest seniors muttered that Kenji probably had a long story behind those punches. It felt like he had just gotten revenge for years of suffering. But the bald uncle shrugged and said, "What story? Kenji's just nuts. Doesn't even look like his father." Zhang's former goons were now whispering among themselves. One of them said Zhang looked so weak today. Was this the same guy who used to act like the boss? Another added he was always this pathetic. One turned to the other and said if Zhang was beaten this badly, that meant he was even weaker than Zhang, which basically made him nothing. As the tension lingered, two gang members began bickering, each claiming they were stronger than the other and challenging each other for rank. Kenji, already fed up, looked at them and said they didn't need to fight amongst themselves, because he was ready to take all of them down himself. Song and the second uncle froze at his boldness. One of the gang guys mocked him, asking if he really thought beating Jong meant he could beat all of them. That's when Myung-jin stepped in, saying they should end it right here. He approached Kenji and extended his hand with a smirk, saying it was nice to meet him. But Kenji brushed his hand away and bluntly said he didn't like guys like him. The seniors were stunned silent. Kenji clarified that maybe they misunderstood. When he said he'd beat them like dogs, he also meant their alliance. Myung-jin's face turned sour with anger. Meanwhile, we cut to the first uncle returning from his trip. The third uncle asked him if something had happened. First uncle raised an eyebrow and asked why he was being questioned. Third uncle pointed out how rare it was for him to follow second uncle's plans. So what had changed this time? First uncle admitted that, surprisingly, even second uncle's half-baked plans sometimes worked. He reminded third uncle how worried he used to be that if Kenji didn't become the successor, the Fire Bear gang could fall apart. Third uncle nodded grimly. First uncle then revealed that ever since young master decided to become the successor, other gangs had started moving in silence. Everyone assumed the boss's eldest son would take the spot, but now they'd have to tell the world about Kenji, because that's the only way both the gang and young master would survive. Back in the schoolyard, Myung-jin stepped up to Kenji again, this time threatening him, asking if he really thought he could walk out alive after fighting people like them. Kenji calmly nodded. Myung-jin's temper flared. He asked if Kenji was actually ready to fight. Kenji said it sounded like a good idea. Park Do, the second uncle, and everyone else were left stunned. Park Do stepped forward and announced that all gang members should leave the area. He also told Myung-jin to calm down, insisting it wasn't the right time to fight. Myung-jin asked incredulously if Park Do was really going to let Kenji walk away after everything. Park Do reminded him of their purpose. They were here to greet the successor of the Fire Bear gang, not pick a fight. Myung-jin still looked furious, saying that they were here to greet him, but Kenji seemed more interested in starting a war. Park Do calmly explained that Kenji was probably reacting under a heavy adrenaline rush and his words weren't coming out right. He advised waiting a bit before talking again. Myung-jin finally agreed, saying if Park Do insisted, they'd leave. Park Do turned to the rest of the gang members and told them there was no point sticking around. He'd contact them later. Some of the gang guys grumbled, saying Kenji was getting cocky, but agreed to leave since Park Do said so. Watching them go, Park Do quietly said he'd get in touch with them later. As a few gang members stayed back, they started barking like dogs, annoyed that they were letting someone like Kenji walk away. They complained that Kenji wasn't even part of their gang, had no real ties to them, and yet was being treated like a leader. One of them shouted that it was time to decide who the new boss of the school should be. Park Do overheard and replied, "Sure, let's decide now. So who's brave enough to challenge me in song?" No one moved. Park Do smirked and told them all to leave if they weren't going to step up. The members left, sulking and angry, wondering how a loser like Kenji could become their school's leader. The scene cut to Kenji standing alone while second uncle praised him. He said Kenji had done a great job and that he was truly proud of him. He had always believed in his young master. Kenji had grown so much. Kenji, however, looked down and asked if what he had done was really the right thing. Second uncle reassured him it absolutely was. He reminded Kenji that he had always wanted to put that scumbag in his place. Still feeling off, Kenji muttered that it was time he made the first move and walked away. Second uncle watched him go and said he'd go prepare for a party. Outside, Song caught up with Kenji and asked if he was okay. Kenji said he thought beating Jong would make him feel better. But when he saw Jong helpless and unable to defend himself, all Kenji felt was emptiness, like he had turned into the very kind of person he once hated. Song told him he hadn't changed. That was just revenge. Kenji agreed, but before he could finish, Song cut him off with a half-smile and said, "Wasn't your dream to become a bad person anyway?" Then he got serious, telling Kenji that now was the time to decide which direction he really wanted to take. Kenji looked away and softly asked himself what direction he truly wanted, and slowly drifted into silence. On the other side, second uncle approached Park Do and gave him a pat on the back for handling everything so well. He told him that after today's drama, rumors about young master were bound to spread. Park Do chuckled and agreed. Second uncle then said that now that young master had achieved his first goal, he'd probably become more serious about his responsibilities. He also revealed that he had already informed Jae-wook, referring to the first uncle, about Park Do. All he had to do now was go and introduce himself. Park Do thanked him, feeling a mix of pride and nerves. Just as the uncles started to leave, second uncle suddenly remembered something. He pulled out his trimmer and muttered that he almost forgot something important. Without wasting time, he stripped Zhang down and gave him a full-body shave, from head to toe, before casually saying, "Now the job's done." Then he walked off, dragging Park Do along. Zhang's partner ran to him, shouting his name in shock. Meanwhile, outside the school, second uncle reminded Park Do not to forget his introduction. Park Do nodded obediently. A car pulled up, and first uncle rolled down the window. Park Do nervously introduced himself, and first uncle welcomed him warmly, inviting him to get in. Park Do panicked slightly and apologized awkwardly. Second uncle nudged him to sit inside so they could go grab something to eat. As he got in the car, Park Do thought to himself, "Wait, are we really just going to eat?" Inside, he was completely stressed. The scene shifted to a gym, where Zhang lay almost lifeless. His friends tried to help him up. As Zhang regained consciousness, the first thing he asked was where his clothes were, and why his body felt so smooth. Then he screamed, realizing he'd been shaved bald all over. Furious, he said he'd been set up by people he once considered brothers. He laughed bitterly, recalling how he had trusted them, not knowing they had planned this all along. Then his expression turned dark. He growled that they'd messed with the wrong guy. He didn't fear death, but he'd definitely take his revenge. His friends tried to convince him to go to the hospital, but Zhang refused. He snapped at them, telling them to stop wasting time and get moving. He said he had nothing left to lose now, and he'd make them see how dangerous a man with nothing to lose could be. Back at the school, the scene jumped to the super seniors. Hyun muttered that Park Do was definitely plotting something. They all began to head their separate ways. Myung Jin offered to give Hyun a ride on his bike, but Hyun awkwardly declined, saying he had an appointment and needed to go alone. He left quickly, leaving Myung Jin confused. Turning to the bald guy next to him, Myung Jin asked if he thought Hyun really had an appointment. The bald guy shrugged and said Hyun was always hiding something. Then, mid-sentence, he cursed, realizing he had accidentally given a straight answer to a Christian, something he seemed to avoid. Myung Jin laughed and said it was okay. He knew the bald guy wanted to be friends. The bald guy rolled his eyes and told him to shut up, saying he should be thankful he didn't bring his motak, a wooden stick used by Buddhist monks to chant. Then he stormed off. Myung Jin asked where he was going and offered him a ride, but the bald guy barked that he'd never sit on his back seat. Myung Jin laughed, riding away alone on his bike. Myung Jin thought seriously. Kenji had basically declared war on all of them. He wasn't just some random kid. He was the son of the Fire Bear Gang's leader, and with both Park Do and Song supporting him, things were getting serious. Myung Jin realized he had to make a move soon. He needed to choose his side carefully or he'd be next in line to get wrecked. On his way, he saw the bald guy again and shouted, "Baldy!" just to mess with him. The bald guy fumed, mentally swearing he'd kill him one day. He had been dreaming of owning the legendary Buddha ears, but this fool had tattooed Christian symbols over them. That scene ended there. Back at school, a few students were gossiping. They said they'd heard Kenji beat up Song and was now enemies with the whole school. Lee and her friends overheard and were shocked. Even the third-year students started whispering about how Kenji had made enemies with the Super Alliance. Cut to Kenji's house, where the family had already set up for a celebration. Park Do arrived and looked around in awe. Second uncle nudged him and told him to introduce himself to the family. Then, turning to the others, he proudly said, "Guys, this is my little brother. He's officially joining the family today, so treat him well." All the uncles gave him a strange, mischievous smile and said, "Nice to meet you." Park Do was nervous out of his mind. Meanwhile, back at school, Zhang's gang members were shown asking around, wondering where the rest of their crew had gone. While a few gang members were deep in discussion, one of them revealed that he'd overheard a plan. A group was plotting to beat up Kenji. Some were ready to support the plan while others backed off. As the scheming continued, someone expressed disbelief that Park Do was siding with Kenji. A long-haired guy spoke up, saying they had nothing left to lose and needed to take some kind of action. Meanwhile, Kenji sat alone, lost in thought. He started wondering if he had truly become a bad guy. Maybe now Susan would finally like him. He called her, but she didn't pick up. That immediately raised red flags in his mind. She'd never ignored his calls before. What if something had happened to her? He decided he had to confess his feelings soon. Trying to shake it off, he thought to himself that he was now a full-fledged gangster. He even walked like one, and had picked up the nasty habit of spitting anywhere he pleased. Standing outside his house, he guessed his uncles were probably waiting for him inside. But when he entered, the house was eerily quiet. Heading upstairs, he was stunned to see his father standing there. Kenji froze. His father walked over and gave him a hug, the first in 10 years. Kenji didn't know how to react, still processing the surreal moment. His father then said he'd heard about Kenji taking over the school and that he'd been waiting for this day for years. The scene turned emotional, even making the usually tough second uncle tear up. Kenji, overwhelmed, hugged his father back tightly. Suddenly, his dad switched gears, saying sorry for getting emotional and declaring it was time to party. He shouted for someone to bring alcohol. Kenji reminded him he was still a minor and technically not allowed to drink. His dad laughed it off, saying he'd prepared everything. It was a surprise for Kenji, and anyway, a son should always learn to drink from his own father. With that settled, the family started celebrating. Drinks were poured, laughter filled the room. One uncle hesitated, wondering if it was okay to drink in front of the boss. Another uncle shrugged and said this kind of booze doesn't come every day. Drink up. Kenji's father poured a drink into his glass. Kenji hesitated, thinking, I'm still in school. And underage. Is this really okay? But then he reasoned that it wasn't technically illegal, took a sip and gulped it down. Everyone looked at him, waiting for his reaction. Kenji immediately made a face and blurted out how awful it tasted. He couldn't understand how anyone drank this garbage. The three uncles looked heartbroken. Then his father gave a deep, dramatic line, that both liquor and life were bitter. He said he'd waited for this moment for years, and now Kenji was saying the drink was trash. He added that, in the future, Kenji would probably be dying to taste this exact liquor again. Seeing his dad look so defeated, Kenji quickly backtracked and claimed it actually wasn't that bad. The taste was starting to grow on him. His father burst out laughing and shouted to everyone that his son hated the drink and they should all chug it instead. He yelled for confirmation, calling them rascals, and reminded them that this bottle cost 20 million won, around $2,000. That made the uncles panic and thank him nervously. His father then announced he was heading out to get some fresh air and told them to keep enjoying the drinks. As he left, Kenji tried to sip again, insisting he liked it now. But his father calmly said Kenji didn't need to force himself just to make him happy. He was already proud of him for choosing the right path. Just then, first uncle stood up and said he'd join the boss outside. Kenji's father agreed and turned to him, praising Jae-wook for doing a great job guiding Kenji. He believed handing Kenji over to Jae-wook had been the best decision. Jae-wook humbly disagreed, but the boss continued, asking how he had changed Kenji's mind so quickly. First uncle explained that Kenji had simply made that decision himself one day. The boss was genuinely impressed and said this was the best possible ending, as long as Kenji didn't suddenly change his mind again. He then praised Jae-wook for helping so much and joked that he deserved a big award for his work. As they talked, a member of the Fire Bear gang, C1, stepped out of a car and locked eyes with first uncle. Tension crackled between them. Clearly, something had gone down in the past. The boss, however, wasn't done partying. He said he still wanted to spend time with Kenji and told Jae-wook and C1 to grab some drinks in the meantime. C1 politely refused, saying he was fine outside and had to drive later. The boss nodded and said he could come in whenever he felt like it, then disappeared inside to continue the celebration. Outside, the scene shifted to C1 and Jae-wook. C1 looked at him and sarcastically commented that his injuries seemed to have healed. Well, of course they had to. After all, he did nothing all day except babysit the young master. First uncle didn't respond. He just stared at C1, unfazed. C1 taunted him again, accusing him of disrespecting his seniors with that glare and warning that maybe one slap wasn't enough. Just then, second uncle announced he was heading out, as usual, thanked everyone and closed the gate behind him. C1, still fuming, muttered that Jae-wook was getting a bit too full of himself, acting like he was better than him. Inside the house, the boss turned to first uncle and asked if there was a problem between him and C1. First uncle denied it, But the boss wasn't convinced. He reminded them both that they should act like real men, not squabble over petty things. They were from the same hometown and should support each other. Sure, C1 could be arrogant, but he was a good guy deep down. Switching the subject, he mentioned how proud he was of second uncle. He had done exactly what was asked. First uncle nodded and said everything was ready. The boss just had to head to the rooftop. The boss agreed and told him to send Kenji up as well. First uncle went to find Kenji, who was feeling a little too buzzed. He told his uncle that his heart was racing, and first uncle replied that it was clearly the alcohol hitting him. He urged him to head to the rooftop quickly. Upstairs, a fire was already burning, with 2 boxes placed beside it. The boss told second uncle to step down. Though hesitant, second uncle bowed, apologized, and left. On the stairs, he ran into Kenji, who noticed his uncle looked a little downcast. Kenji walked up to his father, confused, and asked why he'd been called up. His father said he just needed to confirm something. That's when Kenji noticed the 2 boxes. They were filled with his certificates and awards. His father looked at him and calmly said, "Burn them." Kenji was stunned. Those were the result of years of hard work. How could he just burn them? But his father was firm. He said Kenji had spent all those years being the kind kid. And what had it really gotten him? He wasn't a responsible citizen or a proper man. Not yet. He told him to hurry and burn the papers. Kenji hesitated. He looked at the stack of achievements, a lifetime of effort, but then took a breath. He wasn't the same person anymore. Without another word, he lit the match and burned it all. Tears welled up in his eyes. Afterward, he hugged his father and said he did what was asked, and that this really was the best for him. His father smiled and said now he could finally live in peace, and that he'd be waiting for Kenji's good news. Kenji, confused, didn't ask what he meant. His father then said he was heading out and told Kenji to go enjoy himself with his uncles. Kenji sat there for a moment, thinking how far he had come. He had changed too much to turn back now. Pulling out his phone, he saw that Susan still hadn't returned his call. That wasn't like her. He figured it was best not to call again. Not when he'd been drinking. Suddenly, the phone rang. His face lit up. Maybe it was Susan. But nope, it was Lee. Kenji answered, a bit confused, and asked why she was calling so late. Lee shot back with sass, asking if she needed a reason to call him now. Kenji, unfazed, said fine, he just hang up then. Lee shouted back, demanding if he was seriously ending the call. Kenji explained that he needed to get back to the others, they were all drinking. But if she had something to say, she could go ahead. Lee caught the word alcohol and asked when he'd started drinking. Kenji quickly clarified he wasn't drinking much, just a small sip, and that his uncles were the ones actually partying. Hearing that, Lee said, good. Since you're not drunk, meet me. I have something important to tell you. Kenji, sensing it was urgent, agreed. It wouldn't take long anyway, he thought. As she tied her shoelaces, Lee said she'd meet him at his place. But Kenji insisted on meeting at a nearby park instead. Lee pouted, saying she wanted to say hello to his uncles too, but agreed and told him she'd see him soon. Kenji said she could take her time, and Lee replied playfully that she'd arrive at her own pace, though she actually rushed out, hopping onto her scooter. Back at Kenji's house, he came down from the rooftop to find all his uncles asleep. He checked around, whispering to himself if his dad had really left already. Just then, second uncle appeared behind him and asked where he was sneaking off to at this hour. Kenji admitted he was going to meet a friend. Second uncle raised an eyebrow. A girl, perhaps? Kenji nodded. Then came the next question. Is she your girlfriend? Kenji simply replied, it's Lee. At that, all the uncles suddenly snapped awake like it was a code word. They started teasing him. The young master had a crush? Was he dating someone? One uncle offered to teach him the ways of love. Kenji tried to calm them down, telling them to go back to sleep. It looked like they'd all had a long day. But third uncle wasn't letting go that easily. He eyed Kenji's outfit and declared it completely unacceptable for a date. He insisted on helping him pick out better clothes and at least wear a decent necklace. Kenji, now completely overwhelmed, did the only sensible thing. He ran and outside. Kenji stepped into the cool night air, whispering to himself that he had almost gotten caught. Somehow he'd slipped out just in time. But then a light fell on him and he froze. Standing ahead was Lee, grinning. Kenji looked at her, Surprised, she was already there. Lee cheerfully said she had come to pick him up and asked if she looked cool. Kenji raised an eyebrow and asked if she'd stolen the motorcycle she was riding. He added that she didn't even have a license. Wasn't that illegal? Lee rolled her eyes and clarified she'd paid for the bike herself and, yes, she had a license. Kenji laughed and admitted he had genuinely thought she stole it. But it turned out she was actually a decent person. Lee handed him a helmet and told him to hop on. She'd give him a ride to the park. But Kenji declined. He wasn't in the mood for a ride and suggested they just walk instead. Cut to the park scene. Lee commented on how fresh the air was and Kenji agreed. Lee pointed out that it was the same park he had run to after throwing a rock at her and Jong. Kenji was surprised, saying he hadn't recognized it in the dark. Lee laughed and reminded him that he had actually hit both her and Jong with that rock. At the time, she thought he was totally insane. Kenji apologized, saying he never meant for it to hit her. Lee warned him that he was lucky. If her pretty face had been scarred, she might have killed him. She burst into laughter. Kenji chuckled nervously, lightly touching her forehead and saying there wasn't even a scar. He was safe. That made Lee blush. She quickly said she'd talk to him at school and started walking away. Kenji called out, asking if she was mad, but she didn't reply. She just kept going. On the other side, Lee was mentally panicking. She needed to start her bike fast. If she didn't and Kenji came closer, he might hear how loudly her heart was beating. She quickly started the scooter and sped off, while Kenji stood there trying to stop her. Riding away, Lee thought to herself that things could have gone worse. Just then, she got a message from Kenji. "I'm sorry. Come back." Lee read it quietly and told herself that next time, she'd have to tell him everything. The scene shifted. Now we saw Jong and his gang of bully friends. One of them scoffed and asked if Jong had called him out for this nonsense. He accused Jong of being even crazier than he'd thought. He reminded Jong how badly he'd already been beaten, and yet here he was, planning revenge again. Jong snapped back, calling them losers and telling them to leave. One friend stepped forward, insulted, and warned him not to call people names unless he wanted to get beaten up again. He stormed off. Jong then turned to the remaining members and asked if they'd help him take down Kenji and Song. They agreed, but only if Jong made the first move. They said they weren't the type to stay silent after being humiliated. What Kenji and Song did had to be paid back. Jong smiled wickedly. Now that was more like it. They had 6 people, they didn't need any weaklings. He asked confidently if 6 guys could really lose to just 2. One of them replied that while it was only 2 opponents, they still couldn't afford to lower their guard. Jong laughed. They're the ones who should let their guard down, not us. Another member interrupted and told him to quit the tough talk and actually share the plan. Jong smirked and said he had won. The screen cut out. The next scene showed Song's little sister enjoying a sandwich like it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Song smiled and told her to eat as much as she wanted. She hesitated, saying she couldn't eat everything since they only had one. Song offered to get her more, but she shook her head. She was thinking how could she eat 2 when her brother hadn't even had one? She broke the sandwich in half and offered him the other piece. Song refused, saying he'd already eaten at school. Their sweet exchange made nearby people smile. After finishing, Song gave his sister a piggyback ride and walked off. Then we returned to Kenji. He was still bothered by how Lee had suddenly run off the night before and hadn't answered his calls since. He wondered if he had said something wrong. She had said she wanted to talk to him but left without saying anything. Now, both Lee and Susan weren't responding, and it was making him anxious. As he reached the school gate, he spotted the student council president and vice president. The president called him over for a private conversation. They walked a bit and Kenji asked where they were going. The president said they had arrived and turned serious. He looked Kenji in the eye and said he was worried about him, which was why he needed to tell him something important. Kenji nodded, listening. The president finally revealed that the chief teacher wanted to transfer Kenji out of the school. This information came from the latest staff meeting. Kenji was shocked. He asked why, what made the chief teacher decide this so suddenly. The president explained that the chief teacher believed Kenji's presence was affecting the other students. He thought they were getting influenced in the wrong way, and that the school environment was getting disrupted. That's why he didn't want Kenji there anymore. Kenji's mind raced. Could this be because of second uncle? He wondered. The president tried to reassure him, saying it wasn't over yet. He had a plan that could mess up the chief teacher's strategy. Kenji stood quietly as the student council president began, telling him they didn't want him to transfer schools. Kenji admitted he didn't want to leave either, but added in frustration that it wasn't even his fault. Was it his mistake that he was born into a gangster family? The president immediately reassured him it wasn't. In fact, he was actually impressed that Kenji had managed to behave so decently all these years despite growing up in such an environment. He just urged Kenji to protect his good image at school. Kenji, however, wasn't convinced. He said his image was already ruined the moment everyone found out he came from a gangster family. All the good behavior of the past 10 years went down the drain. People just started avoiding him. Even the president had done the same. The president nodded and replied that's exactly why he wanted Kenji to hear him out. He had a plan brewing in his head for days. Kenji raised an eyebrow and asked what kind of plan. The president leaned in with excitement and proposed a school violence eradication campaign. Basically, they'd beat up the bullies and teach them a lesson. Kenji blinked and asked if he was serious. The president reminded him that Kenji himself had once said he wanted to take down the bullies and the so-called Super Alliance. If Kenji did it through this campaign, it would help the school and impress the teachers too. Kenji considered it and agreed it did sound logical. He was going to beat them up anyway. At least now he'd have a reason and the teachers on his side. The president grinned and said he'd get permission from the chief teacher. Kenji shook his hand and agreed to the plan. Soon, they went to meet the chief teacher. The president explained the full plan, adding that Kenji would take care of the students the teachers already hated, which would benefit everyone. Kenji added that the teacher had known him for 10 years and could even call for a parent-teacher meeting if he didn't trust him. That suggestion sent a chill down the teacher's spine. He was terrified that Kenji might actually bring his second uncle again. He nervously agreed to consider it, silently cursing the president for dragging him into this mess. Meanwhile, in class, Kenji sat lost in thought. He wondered if fighting the bullies through this campaign would still make him a kind person, or if it would turn him into something worse than them. Just then, his friend noticed his worried face and asked if he was okay. Kenji thanked him and assured he was fine. The friend reminded him he could talk to him anytime. He was his friend, after all. The teacher interrupted and told them to stop talking. Kenji then noticed that both Sujin and Aji were absent from class. That was odd. Even Lee's friend wasn't around, which probably meant they were out hanging somewhere. But Sujin, she never skipped school. He started to worry. She wasn't answering his calls or texts either. After school, Yoon told Kenji that he'd been going to Academy daily to get better grades. Kenji was surprised to hear talk of tuition. Another friend laughed and teased Yoon, saying he was only going there because a pretty girl had joined the academy. Yoon denied it and told him not to compare him to someone like that. They both said goodbye and left, leaving Kenji thinking maybe he should check out the academy sometime. It might actually be fun. Just then, Song arrived and asked if he wanted to come along. Kenji agreed and they headed off together. On the way, Kenji asked if Song didn't have training today. Song replied that training was still on, but Park-do wanted him to do it at the gym this time. Kenji sighed, realizing everyone had their own things going on and was busy with their life. Song reminded him that even Kenji was working hard now. Elsewhere, Jong and his gang were secretly following Kenji. Jong knew Kenji passed this way daily and wanted to find out where Song lived. But suddenly, Song turned off into a side alley, startling Jong's gang. Song had spotted a shop, and Kenji curiously asked if they sold good tteokbokki, the Korean rice cakes that looked like pasta. Song nodded and said he was getting some packed. Kenji asked if he was buying it for his sister, and Song said yes, it was her favorite. After buying the tteokbokki, Song turned to Kenji and apologized for not being able to treat him too. Kenji smiled and said it was okay. His sister was obviously more important. Just then, Song's little sister appeared and shouted excitedly, calling out to her brother. Kenji chuckled to himself, thinking even today the kind but weak big brother role was going strong. The girl ran up and hugged Song tightly. Kenji was surprised. He hadn't even known Song had a sister. Song explained he hadn't meant to hide it. But before he could say more, his sister cut in, proudly declaring that she had told her brother to secretly protect Kenji. Song's little sister looked up at Kenji and said sweetly that he had helped her a lot. Kenji smiled awkwardly and replied that all he really did was get beaten up while trying to protect her, and played with her for a few days. But Song chimed in, saying that even if it was late, he wanted to thank Kenji. He thanked him for spending time with Yoon and for taking care of her. Kenji, seeing the genuine gratitude, smiled and shook Song's hand. Song added that Kenji was actually pretty cool and told him not to worry about what others thought. Just then, Yoon teased him by saying he was cool, but still a little weak. Kenji laughed and thanked both of them. Song gently set Yoon down, and she immediately asked her brother if they weren't going to eat together. Song looked down at her and replied that he had to leave for training and told Yoon to eat the snacks he brought before they went bad. Yoon looked a bit disappointed but nodded, saying she wanted to eat with him, but it was okay. She would protect the house while he trained. Then Kenji teased her, reminding her that she was Song's sister and promised they'd all play in the park next time. Yoon smiled and agreed, saying it was always fun playing with him. As Kenji and Song started walking off, Yoon shouted goodbye and thanked them for the delicious food they sent. Kenji smiled and told her it wasn't him. It was second uncle who had cooked it. Just then, Jong appeared nearby, muttering to himself that things were about to get interesting. He sneered at Yoon and said she'd soon know what it felt like to lose something precious. Meanwhile, Kenji and Song were chatting on the way. Kenji asked what today's training was and why Song always skipped school. Song casually said today was leg day, they'd be training their lower bodies. Kenji laughed, asking why someone with a body like Song's still needed to train. Song replied that he did it because he enjoyed it, and the post-training walk home made it feel thrilling. He added that today he'd push himself so hard, he might not even be able to walk. Eventually, they stopped in front of a gym. Kenji looked at the place and asked if this was where they trained. Song explained they actually trained at a separate judo gym and offered Kenji a chance to join them. Kenji politely declined, saying he had other stuff to do today. As he walked away, he couldn't stop thinking about how hard Song was working, while he felt like he wasn't doing much at all. Feeling uneasy, Kenji tried calling Susan, but she didn't pick up. His mind raced. Was something wrong? Should he inform the police or go check on her himself? When he got home, he pulled second uncle aside and asked to speak privately. Once they were alone, Kenji confessed he couldn't reach Susan and feared something had happened to her. He asked if he should ask uncle for help. Second uncle raised an eyebrow and asked if Susan had a boyfriend. Kenji awkwardly nodded. Uncle chuckled and said if she had a boyfriend, she was probably just spending time with him. The other uncles agreed, saying it was normal at that age. Susan was no longer a little girl, and her boyfriend would take care of things. Frustrated, Kenji told them to shut up and stormed out, regretting even bringing it up. Outside the gate, he wondered if they were right. Maybe she was just hanging out with her boyfriend. But deep down, he couldn't shake the worry. Even if he ended up looking like an unwanted third wheel, he decided he had to check. He headed to Susan's house and rang the bell. He thought if she wasn't here, she might be with her dad, though his house was far away. He even considered reporting to the police again, but paused, thinking if she really was with Jong, then he should first check every place she might be before panicking. He debated asking Uncle for help with the long trip, knowing he'd need to switch 2 or 3 taxis and spend quite a bit of money. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Lee and her friends hanging out. One of them joked that Lee rarely called them out like this, asking if she was feeling off. Another friend laughed that if she'd known it was just the 3 of them, she wouldn't have bothered dressing up. Curious, they asked what was going on. Lee finally admitted she had met Kenji the previous evening and didn't think he was interested in her at all. Her friend urged her to make a move. After all, wasn't it her dream to be a gangster's wife? But Lee sighed and said Kenji hadn't contacted her yet. Should she confess her feelings first? Her friend advised her to wait and see if he reached out. Lee, now spiraling, wondered aloud why he wasn't calling. What was he even doing? Her friend rolled her eyes and reminded her that Kenji had always been a loser. He'd call eventually. She just had to be patient. Lee, however, wasn't convinced. Before she could panic further, her phone lit up with a call from Kenji. She lit up instantly. Her friend told her to answer quickly. On the other side, Kenji got straight to the point. He wanted to ask something. When Lee curiously asked what, he requested to borrow her motorcycle for a while. Disappointed, she asked why. Kenji said he needed it to find Susan. It would make the search easier. Lee hesitated for a moment and said that if Kenji was looking for Susan, it might not be necessary. After all, Jong was dating her. If anything happened, he'd take care of it. Kenji paused and admitted she had a point. He wasn't even Susan's boyfriend, so maybe he was overreacting. With a sigh, he said goodbye and hung up the call. As he walked away, he tried to convince himself Jong wouldn't hurt someone he was dating. Just then, Song's little sister called out to Kenji, inviting him to join her for some fish cakes. Kenji smiled and said he'd have the one with cream. While eating, he asked if she wanted to go play afterward. She happily agreed, mentioning that Song would be coming home late because of his training. Meanwhile, Jong was lurking near a building, watching Song's sister closely. He grinned darkly, muttering that he had finally found her. And now, with Kenji nearby too, everything was falling into place. First, he'd take out Kenji, then kidnap the girl and finally destroy Song. Just imagining Song begging for mercy made him smile. He called his gang over and told them it was time to strike. But one of his members hesitated, saying he wasn't comfortable kidnapping a kid. Jong snapped, saying the reason they couldn't beat Song was because none of them had the guts. This was their only chance. Then, one of the gang members spotted Song approaching, and he wasn't walking properly due to his leg workout. Jong's grin widened, thinking even fate was on his side today. He changed the plan, no need to kidnap the girl. They'd jump Song right here. Song reached the staircase and noticed his sister was gone. Assuming she'd gone home, he slowly began climbing. But Jong and his gang suddenly ambushed him. Song tried to defend himself, but his legs were shot, completely useless after the intense training. Even so, he fought back, managing to take down a few guys. But one of them struck him from behind, causing him to stumble and collapse. With his body giving out, the gang pinned him down, taped his mouth shut, and started beating him. Meanwhile, Kenji and Song's sister were returning, only to witness Jong's gang stuffing Song into a van. The girl broke into tears, asking why they were doing this to her brother. Kenji held her and told her not to worry. He'd bring Song back. He sent her home for her safety and promised to inform the police. After making sure she was safe, Kenji returned home and called out to his uncles for help. But to his shock, all of them were passed out drunk. Confused and frustrated, Kenji tried to wake first uncle, but he just slumped off the couch. Kenji realized he had no backup this time. It was all on him. He was about to call the police when his phone rang. It was Susan, but the voice on the other end wasn't hers, it was Jong. He smugly asked if Kenji recognized him. If Kenji wanted to see Susan again, he had to come to the address Jong was sending. And no police, no uncles. If Kenji disobeyed, Susan would die. Kenji tensed up, trying to think of a plan. Just then, Lee appeared on her motorcycle, saying she figured he'd need it. Since he didn't have a license, she offered to ride him there. She asked why he seemed so serious. Kenji explained that it was too dangerous for her to come. Lee joked that he must be worried she'd crash the bike, but reassured him she was experienced. He finally agreed to talk and explained everything to her. Lee was stunned. Jong had truly lost his mind. She insisted on helping and promised to give him a ride. After dropping him off, she'd leave. As they rode off, Lee told him to hold onto her waist so he wouldn't fall. Nervously, Kenji just gripped her shirt. When they reached the building, Kenji told her to stop. He said it was a one-on-one fight now, either he would walk out or Jong would. Then he thanked her and entered the building. Lee still outside, worried. She knew Jong wouldn't fight alone. His gang would be inside too. Inside the hideout, Jong's gang was discussing the same fear. What if Kenji brought his bald gangster uncles? They remembered how badly they'd been beaten last time. But Jong assured them Kenji wouldn't risk Susan's life like that. They had 2 hostages, Kenji would come alone. Then Jong turned to Song and mockingly asked whether Kenji would come with backup or like a scared child. He smacked Song around, laughing that he couldn't answer because of the tape over his mouth. Jong mocked his bound hands and unleashed his anger by beating him further. Susan, horrified, asked if Jong planned to do the same to Kenji. Jong barked that he would, unless she wanted to take Kenji's place. Terrified, she apologized. Jong came closer and reminded her she once said she was Kenji's weakness. So now she needed to stay quiet like bait. If Kenji brought backup, she'd have to send them away. Susan nodded fearfully and prayed silently that Kenji would save her. She muttered that she officially hated bad boys now. One of the gang members nervously asked if Susan could really convince the bald uncle to leave if he showed up. Another panicked, saying if second uncle arrived, they were doomed. Jong shrugged and said he had a backup plan. At that moment, Kenji kicked the door open, his face full of rage. Jong smirked, asking if he'd brought his gangster uncles. Kenji replied coldly that he didn't need them, because he was a gangster. Jong laughed, calling him a weak high schooler who got beat up all the time. Kenji didn't care about labels, he just said one thing: "This ends now." Jong's friends started to panic, whispering that Kenji probably had brought his uncles. Susan called out, asking if he'd come to save her. Seeing her tied up and bruised pushed Kenji over the edge. He turned to Jong, his anger boiling over. Jong mocked him for getting mad over his crush being tied up and beaten. He pointed to Song, saying even he got wrecked. Then Jong gave the order to attack. A guy with yellow hair stepped up, claiming he could handle Kenji alone. But Kenji dodged all his attacks, grabbed his arm, and smashed a punch into his face. He yanked the guy by the hair and demanded they let go of Song and Susan. Jong scoffed and refused. Kenji warned him again. But when Jong didn't budge, Kenji yanked out a handful of hair. Still, Jong and his gang didn't flinch. Kenji realized these guys didn't care about each other. Without hesitation, Kenji grabbed the guy and threw him aside, spitting out angrily that people like him aren't even loyal to their own friends. Even if someone pulls out their friend's hair, they'd still just stand and watch. He warned them that he would beat them all up badly. Jong laughed mockingly and taunted Kenji, saying if his gangster uncles weren't backing him, he wouldn't be anything, just a loudmouth pretending to be tough. Jong added that even without Guangwu, there were still 5 of them, and Kenji thought he could handle them all alone? Meanwhile, Kenji had only one thing on his mind: get Song out first, then they could take them on together. He suddenly charged at Jong, but Jong dodged and smugly said he had let Kenji hit him earlier only because that bald uncle was watching. Then Jong landed a brutal hit to Kenji's ribs. Kenji winced in pain but grabbed Jong's collar. Jong's eyes widened, realizing Kenji might try that dreaded pickaxe technique again. Before he could react, Kenji slammed a hard punch right into Jong's face, making his gang panic. One of Jong's friends attacked Kenji from behind, but Kenji turned and glared at him. Terrified, the guy shouted at the others to stop standing around and help. They all ganged up on Kenji. One guy kicked him, but Kenji caught his leg midair, twisted it, and then bit it fiercely, leaving the guy screaming. Outside, Lee was watching everything secretly and was stunned by how strong Kenji really was. Then she noticed Song tied up and quietly crept in to untie him. Just then, Susan whispered for help too. Lee grumbled in her head, annoyed that this witch was also here, but didn't say anything. Suddenly, Jong appeared behind Lee. Kenji yelled for her to look out, but it was too late. Jong struck her head with a wooden bat, knocking her out cold. Kenji was then overpowered and restrained by Jong's friends. Jong raised the bat to strike him too, but right before he could swing, Song appeared behind and grabbed the bat tightly. Everyone froze in shock. Song then punched Jong straight in the face, sending him flying and wrecking his mouth. Song warned them all not to even dream of leaving this place in one piece. Jong's friends were visibly shaken. Seizing the moment, Kenji broke free, rushed to Song, and asked if he was okay. Song, still panting, said Kenji and Lee got dragged into this because of him. He told Kenji to check on Lee and call an ambulance and to free Susan too. Kenji quickly rushed off to help. Meanwhile, Jong told his gang that Song was still weak, so they'd have to attack him all at once. Kenji reached Susan and untied her. She tried to stand but said she could barely walk. Seeing Susan and Kenji together, Lee couldn't help but feel jealous. Kenji, unfazed, said he needed to help Song and told Susan to assist Lee instead. Susan went over to Lee, but Lee snapped, telling her to stay away and that she was fine. On the other side, Song and Kenji got ready to face Jong and his gang. Kenji said it was time to teach them a lesson, but Song warned him that this wouldn't be easy. They were armed. He asked Kenji if he was ready, then encouraged him, saying he was much stronger than all of them and just needed to fight smart, one at a time. Kenji nodded and agreed he'd take them down one by one. Jong, overhearing this, shouted furiously, still convinced they thought they were stronger. He vowed to destroy both of them and ordered his lackeys to attack. As the minions charged, Kenji and Song started taking them down one after the other. One tried to strike Song from behind with a stick, but the stick snapped on impact. Song calmly turned and knocked him away with one solid punch. Kenji, impressed, laughed and said he expected nothing less. Song was incredibly strong, but Song grimaced, saying his legs had stopped moving. At that moment, Jong came charging at Kenji with a stick, saying they always knew Song was tough, which is why he targeted the weaker Kenji from the beginning. Song realized that Jong was heading straight for Kenji and shouted, but before anything could happen, Kenji just smiled, grabbed Jong by the collar, and slammed him down hard. Song, wide-eyed, thought to himself how quickly Kenji had mastered that pickaxe-like move, and more importantly, how he was finally using his strength properly. Jong's gang stood stunned, wondering when this so-called loser had become such a powerhouse. Meanwhile, Kenji's hands were burning from the friction caused by his tight clothes during the fight. The sensation reminded him of the times he used to massage his uncles before bed and how his hands would feel afterward. Striking a fighting pose, Kenji declared he'd break every one of them. One of Jong's men laughed mockingly, saying fighting stances didn't matter. Real fights depended on weight class. But the moment he threw a punch, Kenji caught his fists and began crushing them like potatoes. Just as another gang member charged at Kenji, Song stepped in and landed a clean punch, knocking the attacker aside. He told Kenji not to worry about the sidekicks, he'd handle them. Kenji should just stay focused on what he was doing. Motivated by this, Kenji went after Jong's minion like a wild dog, beating him mercilessly. The brutal sight made the other lackeys nervous. They looked at each other and wondered if things had gotten way out of hand. What were they supposed to do now? Meanwhile, Jong began calling someone, clearly part of a secret plan. The details of the plan weren't revealed yet, but he ordered his minions to keep Song busy while he went to take on Kenji himself. The rest of the gang swarmed toward Song, whose legs were still barely moving. They took advantage and began attacking him all at once. Kenji, seeing this, tried to help, but Jong shouted at him, snapping his focus back. Jong had taken off his shirt to avoid being grabbed like before. On the other side, Song was mentally scolding himself for skipping lower body training. Still, he composed himself and decided to take them down one at a time. First, he knocked out the guy in the red jacket, then took down the one in green. Just as he turned to deal with the guy in blue, another one, the same guy whose hair Kenji had ripped out earlier, suddenly attacked Song's legs and sneered that he couldn't even hit him now. The rest of the gang yelled that there was no need to strike anywhere else, just focus on hurting his legs. Back with Kenji, Jong warned him not to look away, pretending to feel offended. But inside, he was just stalling, thinking he only had to buy time until he arrived. Then the game would be over. At the same time, at the backside of the building, a man stepped out of a car. This was the person Jong had been talking about. The man, visibly annoyed, questioned why the group couldn't handle things on their own. Why did he have to step in when this was supposed to be a group fight? But he admitted he had no choice. He was only joining because of Saiwon's orders. Saiwon is no ordinary member. He's the right-hand man of the Fire Bear Gang's boss, and famously doesn't get along with First Uncle. The scene then shifted to the Fire Bear Gang's headquarters. There, Saiwon was shown speaking to a junior member about a newcomer. Saiwon seemed intrigued, saying the new guy wanted to play a big role in the gang. His subordinate added that the recruit was a bit behind his peers since he joined late, but he saw potential and brought him in for that reason. The new member confidently stepped forward and told Saiwon that he was ready to do anything. Just give him the word. Saiwon smiled and said that this was the kind of mindset he liked. The spark in his eyes impressed him. He placed a hand on the nervous junior's shoulder and asked why he was so tense. Did he think Saiwon would make him do work without a reward? Pointing at the ring on his finger, Saiwon explained that it represented something important. If the junior completed his task successfully, the ring would be his. The recruit nodded confidently and declared he would succeed no matter what. Saiwon patted his back and said he hoped he would return victorious. Now we saw a man in a black jacket, none other than Saiwon's subordinate, the one who had previously received the ring. He carefully took it off and stared at it, thinking that his entire future depended on this mission. Back on the other side, Kenji and Jong stood face to face. Kenji growled that he would never forgive Jong and that he'd have to pay for what he did. Jong scoffed, mocking him for talking too much. He taunted that Kenji couldn't even use his technique, which was probably why he was scared. Kenji fired back, saying he didn't need any fancy moves to beat a loser like him, then launched a punch. But Jong dodged and countered with a blow to Kenji's stomach. As Kenji stumbled, Jong cruelly asked if that hurt, then added it was still nothing compared to the 4 holes in his chest. Kenji's mind was on Song, who was fighting 5 people alone. When he looked over, He saw Song lying in the corner and feared he was unconscious. But Song was just catching his breath after knocking everyone out and assured Kenji he was fine, telling him to focus on his own fight. Kenji nodded back. Jong, frustrated, grumbled that even his goons couldn't take down a single guy. Still, he was sure Song was too drained to continue and just needed to stall until the special person arrived. But he was growing impatient. Why was that guy taking so long? Jong ran to his jacket to check his phone. But before he could do anything, Kenji appeared behind him, asking sarcastically what he was doing mid-fight. Without waiting for an answer, Kenji punched him right in the face. Fuming, Jong pulled out a knife and warned Kenji that he was about to leave a nice big scar across his face. Kenji stood his ground, saying there was no way he'd lose to someone like Jong. Meanwhile, Song was struggling to move. That's when Saiwon's subordinate finally arrived. Seeing his outfit, Song guessed that he might be one of Kenji's uncles, possibly sent in as reinforcement. Suddenly, the subordinate attacked Kenji from behind, landing a punch on his face. Song shouted a warning, but it was too late. He tried to rush over to help but tripped and collapsed midway. Jong walked over, pressed his knife against Song's face, and coldly said it was game over. He warned Song not to try anything funny or he'd lose an eye. Song, not backing down, asked if Jong had sunk so low that he needed help from a cheap thug. Jong snapped that he was just doing what Kenji did to him. The pulled-out hair, the chest wounds, all caused by a gangster. Jong claimed to be the real victim here. On the other side, Saiwon's subordinate turned back to Kenji and sneered that he went down after just one punch. That's exactly why their boss hated him. He admitted that he had considered switching sides after observing everything, but now he didn't think that would be necessary. He moved to attack again. Kenji, now on the defensive, could barely keep up. He thought to himself how fast this guy was. He was on a completely different level. The subordinate mocked Kenji for not even managing a counterattack. He had expected to fight a lion's cub but ended up with a kitten. As he threw another punch, Kenji grabbed his fists and tried to crush them, but it was no use because he easily broke free his fist, and before Kenji could react, Saiwon's subordinate threw a solid punch that knocked him to the ground. Standing over him, the man mocked Kenji, saying a real man never turns his back on a fight. Lying there, Kenji wondered why his moves weren't working. That's when a memory flashed in his mind. His second uncle's voice echoed, reminding him that one day he'd face someone stronger than himself. He had said, "Young master, I'll teach you a technique that only works if your grip strength is powerful enough. Are you ready to learn it?" Back in the present, Kenji stood up, channeling everything he had learned. He jumped into the air, shaping his hands like tiger claws and slammed them down on the man's neck. Saiwon's guy yelled in shock, asking what Kenji was doing, but Kenji ignored him and wrapped his legs tightly around his opponent. He kept striking repeatedly with tiger claws until the man finally dropped to the ground. Just when Kenji was about to finish him off with one last hit, the man suddenly grabbed his wrist and sarcastically asked how long Kenji planned to sit on him. Kenji was stunned. Even after all that, this guy had tanked his strongest attacks. Meanwhile, Song watched anxiously, thinking there was no way a high schooler like Kenji could take down a seasoned gangster. It just seemed impossible. But just as the fight was about to start again, sirens blared in the distance. Hearing the police, Saiwon's subordinate immediately turned and ran. Outside, first and second uncle had arrived with the police. An officer asked if there had been a school fight here, to which second uncle, clearly irritated, replied that he had been telling them for ages, and how many times did he need to repeat himself. First uncle told him to calm down and come along. He was furious, wondering how these kids even had the nerve to fight in such a place. Then the scene cut to Saiwon's subordinate, who was running away after hearing the sirens. Kenji chased after him, trying to stop him before he got away. As the man jumped into a parked car, he smugly commented how glad he was to have a backup escape plan ready for emergencies. Kenji tried pulling the car door open, but the man kicked him away and sped off. First uncle, watching the chaos unfold, wondered what on earth high schoolers were doing fighting in such a shady area. Just then, a gang member mistook him for a cop and nervously informed him that there were gangsters inside beating each other up. First uncle, completely done with the madness, turned to second uncle and told him to get this lost child out of here before things got any worse. Second uncle squinted at him and said the guy looked oddly familiar. That's when the gang member blurted out that they'd met earlier at the auditorium. Instantly, second uncle grabbed him by the hair and started dragging him away, growling that he knew this guy was part of the group causing trouble. He scolded him loudly, asking whether none of them had any fear left anymore. The poor guy yelped and begged him to let go of his hair. Meanwhile, First Uncle was looking for young Master Kenji. While scanning the area, he spotted Song holding Zhang down on the ground. Zhang, gasping for breath, wondered aloud how someone who looked half dead was suddenly so strong. As soon as Song noticed First Uncle approaching, he casually greeted him. Zhang stared in disbelief, asking why Song was greeting someone during a fight. Assuming First Uncle was a cop, Zhang begged him for help, claiming Song was using unnecessary violence. But then he caught sight of First Uncle's intense glare and hesitated, nervously asking if he wasn't a cop after all. First Uncle ignored Zhang's whining and turned to Song, confirming if he was indeed Song. He then asked him to hold things down for a while longer and walked off toward Kenji. As he moved, his thoughts raced. Was this another gang? He knew Kenji's identity had been exposed, but how had the enemy acted so fast? Just then, Kenji appeared. Seeing his face bruised, First Uncle's anger flared. He stormed over, demanding to know what had happened. Kenji quickly tried to calm him down, insisting he was fine. But First Uncle wasn't convinced. He asked again if he had hurt somewhere else and if the gangster who'd done this had escaped in a car. Kenji explained that the gangster had indeed fled in a white car and added that the person responsible for his injuries was being held down by Song. Without a word, First Uncle turned in rage. He ordered Song to step aside. The moment Song moved, First Uncle launched a brutal kick at Zhang, sending him spinning like a top before crashing down far away. That single move explained why First Uncle was the leader of the gang. Kenji stood stunned, while the other gang members nearby whispered in shock. If he called Kenji young master, then that meant he was Kenji's uncle, and definitely not a cop. Then, First Uncle walked up to Zhang, grabbed him by the legs and scolded everyone, telling them to stop faking unconsciousness. He threatened that if they didn't get up, he'd make sure they'd never get back up again. Instantly, every single one of them scrambled to their feet. Watching this unfold, both Kenji and Song realized that all those gangsters had been pretending the entire time. First Uncle ordered all the gang members to follow him, then grabbed Zhang by the leg and began dragging him along. The rest of the crew quietly trailed behind the uncles like scolded school kids. Outside, the scene had changed. Zhang was lying flat on the ground while the other gang members stood in a straight line, looking like they were waiting for roll call. A police officer, observing the lineup, asked if these were the ones responsible for the attack. All of them nodded in agreement. Just then, a senior officer, Detective Kim, arrived. He looked straight at First Uncle and asked if he really believed what these gangsters were saying, pointing out that they had even gone as far as hurting students. First Uncle calmly responded, suggesting they continue the conversation at the police station. As Detective Kim glanced around, he suddenly recognized Kenji and asked in surprise what he was doing there, and what had happened to his face. He warned Kenji not to say these guys were behind it. Kenji, without hesitation, confirmed that it was them. Detective Kim's face tightened with rage. Without missing a beat, he smacked one of Zhang's lackeys and scolded the group for daring to hurt someone as decent as Kenji. Then he ordered them to split into 2 teams and get into the police cars immediately. He also told First and Second Uncle to come along and reminded them, in case they were planning anything, that trying to escape wouldn't end well. Another officer asked the uncles how they would be coming. First Uncle replied that they'd drive their own car and meet them at the station. He then asked Second Uncle to call for their vehicle and walked over to Kenji. Speaking firmly, he told Kenji and Song that they were both victims and didn't need to say a word until their lawyer arrived. He reassured them not to worry, everything was under control. Kenji then brought up Lee and Susan, reminding First Uncle that they were injured too and might need to go to the station. Hearing this, First Uncle agreed, saying that if the girls were hurt, the case would actually become easier. He told Kenji to bring them along and come in Gun's car while he and Second Uncle headed off to the station first. He asked Kenji to wait right there until the car arrived. First Uncle added that hopefully the gangster who escaped was caught on a black box camera or CCTV nearby, and when they found him, he'd make sure that guy regretted everything. Then, he told Kenji not to stress and left. As they started to part ways, Kenji agreed to come later. Suddenly, Song politely interrupted and said he wanted to go home first before heading to the station. His sister was alone and would be worried sick. First Uncle nodded and said, In that case, Song should come along with them. Kenji gently reminded Song that his sister had been really worried and told him to go to her quickly. Song, still shaken, admitted he didn't know if seeing him like this would actually make her happy. Just then, another uncle arrived with the car, and Song left with the first and second uncles. Meanwhile, Sujin and Lee walked over to Kenji. Kenji noticed the dried blood on Lee's head and asked why she hadn't gone to the hospital. Lee casually replied that Sujin was scared of riding the motorcycle, and besides, the injury wasn't serious, just surface bleeding. Kenji still insisted she not ride in that condition and suggested they wait for Uncle Gwen to arrive with a car so they could first visit the hospital and then the police station. Lee tried to brush it off, saying she could still ride the bike. Kenji firmly told her that if she tried to drive like this, she'd only end up getting more hurt. Just then, Sujin burst into tears and hugged Kenji tightly, asking him to hold her. She said she was really scared and admitted that she now truly hated bad boys. Kenji turned to Lee and asked her to wait a bit while he calmed Sujin down. Lee, clearly annoyed, pointed out that her head was still bleeding while Sujin was busy soaking up sympathy. Sujin, still crying, said she couldn't calm down for some reason. She asked Kenji if he remembered that neighborhood nearby and suggested they take a short walk there until the uncles arrived. She looked at Lee and asked if she'd be okay waiting for 10 minutes. Lee replied that she wasn't able to calm down either and agreed to go along. As they walked, Sujin wondered aloud how many days it had been since she came back. Kenji suddenly stopped and pointed to a nearby slope, telling her it was the same sledding spot they used to play at when it snowed. He added that nothing here had really changed. Then a thought struck him. Sujin's house used to be in this area. He asked if her father still lived here. Sujin looked down and said she wasn't sure, as they hadn't been in contact. Kenji apologized, but Sujin told him it wasn't something to feel sorry about. Back on the road, Lee muttered from behind, dragging the scooter, annoyed that while she was bleeding, the other two were out having a nostalgic stroll. She thought to herself that Kenji must have lived around here before. Then Sujin looked at Kenji and asked if he remembered a specific place. When Kenji looked confused, she reminded him of the bridge nearby, the one where she used to cry in secret after beaten by her dad, and Kenji would always comfort her. Kenji paused, looked a little embarrassed, and then finally said that now he remembered. Lost in thoughts, Kenji stood quietly, realizing it was the very place where he had once made a decision to become a kind and ideal boy, exactly the type Sujin liked. A memory flashed in his mind. He remembered young Sujin crying and saying she would never marry someone like her father. She wanted someone kind, just like Kenji. But right after that, another memory came flooding in. Sujin had told him at school that she actually found bad boys more attractive and that kind people were boring. That moment had flipped a switch in Kenji's head. He had decided then and there to become a gangster, which was why he later agreed to undergo the successor training. Lost in thought, Kenji didn't even notice when Sujin gently grabbed his hand and asked why he looked so serious. She suggested they sit for a bit. Nearby, Lee dragged the scooter and groaned that she was so tired, she might drop dead. Kenji and Sujin sat down together and started talking. Watching them from a distance, Lee muttered to herself that maybe she should take up smoking. On the other hand, Sujin said she hadn't known Kenji's uncles were gangsters. She always thought they'd be as kind as him, though their personalities were kind of intimidating. Kenji raised an eyebrow and asked if she really thought they seemed kind. Sujin nodded and said what shocked her the most was learning Kenji came from a gangster family. She had always known him as someone who helped people and treated everyone with kindness. Kenji, in his heart, knew the truth. He had stayed kind for 10 years, only for her. Then Sujin said something that caught him off guard. She confessed she now hated people like her father and Jong. She'd never date a bad guy again. From now on, she wanted someone kind, someone like Kenji. Kenji's thoughts spiraled. After all the effort he put into becoming a bad person, how could he go back to being kind? He was the successor of the Fire Bear Gang now. There was no turning back. Sujin asked what he was thinking, but Kenji just mumbled, "Nothing." Inside, his heart was heavy. He thought about how he had liked Sujin for 10 long years, how he'd worked so hard for her, and now he felt like he had changed too much. He looked up at the sky, quietly trying to sort out the storm inside him. Sujin, sensing something, leaned her head on his shoulder and gently said that she had always been by his side since childhood. Kenji, staring into the distance, realized she wasn't the only one. He saw images in his mind, his uncles, first and second uncle Lee, his best friend Yoon, Song's sister, and even his father. He said to himself that it wasn't true. Sujin was the only one. There were so many people on his side now. And he wasn't just anybody, he was the heir to the Fire Bear Gang. This wasn't just any gang. It was the Fire Bear Gang. He couldn't go back to being that kind kid. Just then, Sujin broke the silence. With a smile, she said, "Kenji, you know what? After everything that happened, I've realized you're actually a really decent catch. I like you. How do you feel about me?" Kenji froze. This was the moment he had waited for over 10 years. But now, why was he hesitating? Sujin looked at Kenji with hopeful eyes and said she had finally gathered the courage to confess her feelings. So why wasn't he saying anything? Kenji just stood there, silent, trying to stay composed. Sujin said it was okay if he couldn't answer now. She'd give him time. Then she asked if they should head back since everyone must be waiting for them. Kenji quickly stood up and agreed. Surprised, Sujin asked how he suddenly stood up so quickly and asked if he was really Kenji. Kenji replied calmly that he needed time to think, and he wanted to talk to some people before making a decision. Sujin stared at him, stunned. Her mind screamed that this couldn't be the Kenji she knew. As he turned his back on her and walked away, she felt a sinking weight in her chest. Tears filled her eyes as she asked if he hated her. Maybe he did, because all she'd ever done was act clueless and dated someone like Jong. Still crying, she said she believed they could still be together, just like they always had been. But Kenji didn't stop. Desperate, Sujin shouted after him, saying she had told him how she felt and that she was willing to put in effort to become someone he liked. She pleaded with him not to leave. Suddenly, she blurted out, was he planning to date Lee? If that was the case, she swore she could be even better than Lee. She'd try her best, just please don't go. Kenji turned and said softly, "You want to put in effort, Sujin? I don't want that. That would make things even harder for me." Now, the story shifted to a childhood memory. A group of kids was bullying Sujin, mocking her for not having a mother and saying she always got beaten up by her father. Sujin tearfully begged them to stop, but they kept teasing. Just then, young Kenji stepped in and told them to leave her alone or he'd beat them up. One of the bullies sneered, saying, "Oh, now two motherless kids are protecting each other?" Another kid quickly warned him not to mess with Kenji. He lived with scary uncles. But the first bully wasn't fazed. He laughed and said it didn't matter if Kenji had a dozen uncles, he still didn't have a mom. In fact, even if they combined both their families, they still wouldn't match his. Then came the cruelest jab. He said he had more moms than Kenji had ever known. Hearing that, Kenji lost it. He punched the bully hard, making him cry and threatened to go tell his mom. Something Kenji didn't even have. Even then, Kenji didn't stop. He threatened the other boys to leave or else. Sujin, trying to calm him down, said it wasn't good to hurt others. The bullies mocked them again, saying they were holding hands and might as well get married. Furious, Kenji warned them once more, and they finally left, saying they'd report everything to their moms. After they were gone, Sujin thanked Kenji for always protecting her. Kenji casually said he only hit them because they kept yelling that she didn't have a mom. Sujin smiled and said Kenji was really kind. But Kenji just scoffed and said, "Kind? I'm actually a bad person. My dream is to become a gangster." Just then, Susan heard her father's voice calling out to her. She turned to Kenji and said she had to go because her father was calling. Before leaving, she softly added that it wasn't their fault they didn't have a mother. Kenji simply nodded in agreement. In the present, Susan sat silently, her thoughts full of memories. She thought about how Kenji was the only real friend she had during her darkest days. He had meant more to her than just a friend. More than her father, who constantly hit her, and even more than her mother, who had left her behind. Kenji had always been there for her, from elementary to middle school, and even now in high school. The scene shifted to Susan and one of her friends talking. Her friend curiously asked if Kenji liked her. Blushing a little, Susan wondered out loud if they looked good together. Her friend pointed out that since they were childhood friends, dating could be risky. If things went wrong, it could ruin their friendship and make everything awkward. This made Susan pause. Deep down, she didn't want to lose Kenji. She just wanted him to stay by her side forever. Back in the present, Susan was crying, begging Kenji not to leave her. But he didn't stop. The scene cut to Kenji walking up to Lee, apologizing for making her wait. Lee smiled and told him it was okay, mentioning casually that she'd overheard his conversation with Susan. She asked if he was all right. Kenji, with tears still in his eyes, said he was fine and urged her to hurry. Their uncles were probably waiting. Lee teased him, asking who they were really waiting for, and told him to hop on quickly since they'd already walked a lot and couldn't leave the bike behind. Kenji asked about Susan, and Lee assured him they would pick her up later in the uncle's car. She told him to hold on because she was about to start the bike. Kenji hesitated for a second, but then grabbed on and thanked her. Lee, clearly pleased, grinned and sped off. Kenji, holding on tightly, began to worry. She was riding fast, and he wasn't even wearing a helmet. As they arrived, an uncle saw them and greeted Kenji, calling him young master. Kenji asked if they had been waiting long. The uncle looked at Kenji's face and asked what had happened to him. Kenji just said he was fine and would explain everything later. He then told Lee to get into the car. Once inside, Kenji instructed the uncle not to head straight to the police station but to first stop by the old neighborhood where they used to live. On the way, Kenji kept trying to call Susan, but she didn't pick up. When they arrived, Kenji stepped out and looked around, but Susan was no longer there. He stood there, wondering where she could have gone. The scene then cut to the police station, where officers were questioning Zhang and his gang, asking if they were the attackers. Zhang quickly denied it and claimed they were the victims. He pointed at his broken teeth, saying they had been beaten up badly. Detective Kim didn't hold back. Hearing Zhang claim he was the victim, he smacked him lightly on the head and snapped at him for having the guts to call himself one. Then, he ordered another officer to start calling the parents of all the gang members. Some of the boys panicked and tried to talk their way out, saying that since it was school violence, the school committee should handle it. They begged the officer not to involve their parents and promised to do voluntary work at school instead. But Detective Kim wasn't buying it. He glared at them and said this wasn't just some schoolyard brawl. It would be treated as a criminal case. Zhang's eyes widened. He gulped and thought to himself, "Damn, I'm really screwed this time." Meanwhile, the other gang members huddled together, whispering nervously. One of them asked if Kenji would also be treated like a criminal since he was involved in the fight too. They all agreed that if their parents found out, they were dead meat anyway. One of Zhang's lackeys, the one who had his hair ripped out by Kenji, complained about the no-eyebrows detective acting overly tough. He argued that they had taken a beating too, so it should be seen as a mutual fight, just some school violence. He insisted they'd only get minor punishment, maybe some volunteer work, and then they'd be off the hook. Another boy, wearing a blue shirt, muttered that calling their parents was just overkill. Just then, the mother of one of the boys stormed in and loudly defended her son, claiming he hadn't done anything wrong. She tried to take him home with her, pulling him up from the chair. But Detective Kim stepped in and warned her that she could face legal consequences if she tried to remove a suspect from custody. Other officers quickly moved to stop her. The woman, unfazed, snapped back, asking if they even knew whose son he was. She declared they couldn't stop her like this. Detective Kim shouted back, asking if she really believed her son was there for doing good deeds. He told her point-blank that her son had formed a group and tried to seriously harm 2 other kids. He told her to stay exactly where she was. The woman's eyes flared as she shouted back, asking if he even knew who her son's father was. She said her husband was extremely close to the station chief, and that her son could never be an attacker. He must have just gotten dragged into this mess by the losers he hung out with. Hearing this, her son tried to defend his friend, asking her how she could talk about them like that. But she yelled even louder, questioning what kind of friends he had. Could they even help him in the future? She scolded him for wasting time with useless friends and reminded him how many times she had told him to stay away from them. Now, because of them, he was stuck here. The whole group, Zhang and his gang, watched in silence, thinking to themselves that this lady was really going overboard. They weren't that bad. Just then, the door swung open and in walked the father of the boy in the green jacket. As soon as his son saw him, fear washed over his face. The man marched in and asked what his son was doing there, then turned to the officers and demanded to know what had happened. Detective Kim explained that all these boys had ganged up and attacked 2 students. But instead of reacting with concern, the father casually brushed it off, saying that kids grow up by fighting. What was so wrong about that? Detective Kim didn't flinch. He repeated that this wasn't just a scuffle. It was categorized as special violence, and they should prepare for a criminal case. This set off both parents, who angrily questioned if the police were trying to ruin their children's futures. They insisted the school committee should handle this. After all, it was school violence. Another officer replied that the school committee only handled such matters to a limited extent. That's when Detective Kim, clearly fed up, shouted, asking if they'd all gone crazy. Second uncle, observing everything, whispered that bringing the boys here seemed pointless if the school was just going to handle it. Then, the parents again pushed the idea of letting the school committee deal with it. The mother of the boy in the blue shirt chimed in, asking what everyone was waiting for and insisting they should all leave. Hearing this, the bullies started smiling, thinking they were off the hook. But first uncle had other plans. He thought to himself that this wasn't right. He couldn't let them go that easily. He needed to stall. Speaking up, he told Detective Kim they couldn't let the kids leave just like that. Not only had they attacked 2 boys, but 2 girls were also hurt in the incident. And on top of that, the boys had been driving without licenses despite being underage. This got Kim's attention. He asked if they had really been driving without licenses. At that, the parents flared up again, yelling at first uncle to stay out of their business and questioning whether he was a detective or a judge. Second uncle couldn't take it anymore. His anger burst out, and he asked if they really wanted to die at his hands. First uncle quickly stepped in to defuse the tension. Calmly, he introduced himself as Yang Jae-wook from the Fire Bear Gang. Hearing that name, the Green Jacket boy's father immediately backed off. Nervously, he said they could settle things peacefully and even asked if first uncle knew Kong Han-kook. First uncle smirked and said that if he knew their boss, then surely they could settle things, especially since his son had dared to lay hands on their boss's son. With that, he grabbed the man's arm. The boy's father looked alarmed and asked what he was doing. First uncle replied firmly that he just wanted to know what kind of relationship he had with their boss. Maybe they could talk outside. The father hesitated, asking what they really wanted. First uncle warned him to either come outside willingly or he'd have to call the boss. That was enough to shake the father's confidence. He looked visibly frightened now. At that moment, Detective Kim looked around and remarked that gangster Jae-wook might be acting bold in the police station. But before dealing with him, he needed to settle the current situation first. He said he'd handle Jae-wook later. For now, his priority was going after the ones who had attacked Kenji. Soon after, both sets of parents pleaded not to press criminal charges. Then, one of the bullies' mothers questioned who the actual victims were since they hadn't even shown up yet. She suggested they call them in so everyone could apologize and resolve the issue peacefully. Right then, Kenji, Lee, and Song walked into the station. As soon as they entered, Kenji declared they had no intention of accepting any apologies or settling the matter quietly. He explained that all of them had beaten him and Song badly. Immediately after, Lee added that Jong had hit her on the head with a wooden bat, and she was still bleeding because of it. Following that, Song shared that after being assaulted, he had been kidnapped and dragged to a factory by the same group. Moments later, the Fire Bear Gang's lawyer arrived and confirmed that everything the victims were saying was absolutely true. He stated that the school committee would also take strict action due to the violence. Additionally, the bullies had committed other offenses like vehicle theft and unlicensed driving, which meant they'd face separate criminal charges. Under Sections 8 and 9, they would either be transferred to another school or expelled completely. Upon hearing this, Detective Kim smiled and said now they were talking sense. He complimented the lawyer for speaking his language. Then, second uncle said this was exactly what he had expected from lawyer Jang. Right after, first uncle remarked that it was time for them to leave. A moment later, Detective Kim turned serious again and asked who had stolen and driven the car. At that point, Jong panicked internally. He couldn't reveal he had help from a gangster, or else his life would be in danger. Before Jong could come up with a lie, one of his own friends suddenly spoke up and said it was Jong who had done it. Now cornered, Jong was left with 2 terrible choices. Either tell the truth and face the gangster's wrath, or take full responsibility and ruin his own life. After recalling the gangster's promise that if Jong took the blame, his financial needs would be covered, Jong finally chose the second option. He confessed that he had stolen and driven the car himself. Then Detective Kim ordered his team to contact Jong's parents and instructed Kenji, Lee, and Song to come with him to headquarters to file a formal report. Before they left, First uncle pulled Kenji aside and advised him to write down exactly what happened, especially how he got beaten, without adding anything unnecessary. Lawyer Kim had already explained everything clearly. At the same time, first uncle suspected that Jong wasn't telling the full truth and was likely covering for someone else. He also suspected that Jong had help from the gangster and was now lying out of fear, trying to protect him. While he acknowledged that Jong seemed loyal, he also believed the kid was utterly useless in real trouble. Meanwhile, second uncle walked over and asked if they were supposed to wait around. In response, first uncle said that based on how things looked, they still had one more person to find, and that person needed a good beating. Then, first uncle approached a nearby officer and asked if he was the one who had brought them there. The officer nodded. First uncle told him to check the car's dashcam and surrounding CCTV footage. If a white van appeared in the video, he should investigate it. There was a good chance the van was stolen. The officer agreed and said he would check. First uncle also added that he could confirm further details with Kenji if needed. After that, he turned to his group and said they should leave and wait for the young master in the car. As he walked out, he thought to himself that he already had a strong idea about who was behind all this. Someone hiding in the shadows, pushing the blame onto a high schooler who could barely defend himself. Even though the young master's identity had now been exposed, he knew the other gang members would take time to make their move. Still, the fact that a traitor was hiding within their own gang burned him up inside. Soon, the scene shifted outside to show both uncles walking toward their car. As they arrived, gang members greeted them, thanking them for their hard work. First uncle thanked them back and said they had also done well. He told everyone to head to headquarters quickly since that's where the young master was now. Inside the car, first uncle was seen calling an emergency meeting. His face showed worry, which second uncle noticed. He asked what was bothering him so much. First uncle replied with a question. What would you do if there was a traitor in our gang? Second uncle, without hesitation, said he would kill him himself. All he needed was the order. Hearing this, first uncle chuckled and agreed that killing would indeed be the best option. That intense conversation marked the end of the scene. Right after, the scene shifted back to Kenji and his friends with Detective Kim. The detective sighed and mentioned it would have been better if the station chief had also been there. He then thanked Kenji and the others for cooperating so well and promised that the troublemakers would be punished properly. Kenji nervously said thank you. Then the detective advised him not to handle things alone if anything like this happened again. He should always come to them. Kenji nodded and replied that he understood. Laughing, the detective added that Kenji had now won 2 bravery awards and was the pride of their country. Kenji smiled and nodded again, but in his mind he thought otherwise. He wasn't the same Kenji anymore. The truth was, he no longer saw himself as brave. He had become someone darker, not someone who deserved awards. Afterward, Kenji and his friends got ready to leave. As they walked out, the detective told them to go on. From here, the school violence committee would handle everything. After the intense events, Kenji turned to his friends and suggested they head to the hospital. He added that he would ask his uncles to drop them off. Just then, Lee spoke up, saying she needed to pick up her bike and could go to the hospital on her own. Right after that, Song chimed in too, mentioning that his house wasn't far and he could get there by himself. Kenji frowned and reminded them both that they were injured. They couldn't just head out like that. Then he told them that his uncles were already waiting nearby and could easily give them a lift. Moments later, his first uncle showed up. Kenji greeted him, saying he was just about to call. He also asked where the other uncles were. The first uncle replied that they were staying behind the car to avoid drawing attention by arriving as a group. Then, he mentioned that he had overheard their conversation and confirmed that they'd help pick up Lee's bike and drop Song home. Hearing that, both Lee and Song thanked him sincerely. Then the uncle assigned them into groups. Song would go with him, while Kenji would ride with Lee in Gun's car. Afterward, as they reached the car, all the uncles thanked Kenji for his hard work. Kenji smiled and told them there hadn't been much trouble. They only had to write a report. Eventually, we see Song sitting inside the car with the first and second uncle. As they drove, the first uncle asked Song if he should drop him at the same spot as before. Song nodded. Then, the uncle mentioned that he wanted to discuss something with him, but thought it'd be better after Song had visited the hospital. Song replied that he'd go the next morning as soon as he woke up. In his mind, though, he figured if he went to the hospital right now, they'd throw him straight into the emergency room. so he decided to bear with the pain until tomorrow. The first uncle nodded and let it be. Meanwhile, back in the other car, the third uncle asked Kenji to sit in the front seat. Just then, one of the gang members teased him, asking if he was trying to interfere in the young master's dating life. The third uncle laughed and admitted that it had taken him a while to realize Kenji was growing up. Then the gang member jokingly pointed out that maybe that's why the uncle was still single, always a little slow on the uptake. Afterward, the uncle told Kenji and Lee to sit together in the back and even added that they could pretend the uncles weren't even there. Kenji smiled at that and invited Lee to sit next to him. Lee quietly thought it was nice. Maybe his uncles were actually trying to bring them closer. That thought made her feel warm. Soon, Kenji and Lee were seen sitting in the back seat. Kenji looked over and asked if she'd be okay riding her bike by herself. He even offered to come along just to be sure. Lee nodded and said it was fine. She'd drop him home afterward anyway. While Kenji and Lee sat in the back seat, the uncle driving in the front glanced at them through the mirror and smiled. Then, he joked that the young master didn't need to rush home, especially when the two looked so good together. Kenji, clearly flustered, told his uncle to stop acting weird and just focus on driving. Meanwhile, Lee silently guessed that his uncles were definitely trying to set them up. Not that she minded. She figured this might actually be a great opportunity. Then, the third uncle leaned toward a gang member and whispered that the two in the back were getting awkward, and someone should say something quick. Picking up on the cue, the gang member turned around and casually asked Lee what she thought about the young master. That sudden question made Kenji freeze in shock, while Lee blushed and stammered, unsure what to say. The gang member quickly laughed and said he was just joking, then pointed out that they'd arrived. He asked if the cute little motorcycle outside belonged to her, and told Kenji that he could get off now. He added that they'd wait for him, and even if he didn't come back, he'd cover for him by explaining everything to the first uncle. Afterward, we see Kenji and Lee standing beside the bike. Kenji laughed and said his uncles really liked to joke around. Lee nodded, agreeing, and said they should get going. As she got on her bike, she told Kenji to hop on and put on a helmet. Then, half teasing, she added that he could hold on to her if he wanted to. Kenji didn't hesitate. He held her from behind and said they needed to get to the hospital quickly. Lee smiled and took off. Eventually, we see them outside the hospital. Lee had already gotten checked up and told Kenji proudly that nothing serious had happened. Kenji sighed with relief, admitting he had been genuinely worried when she got hit. Then, Lee mentioned something odd. She said someone had hit her before the rock even landed, and she still couldn't figure out who it was. Hearing that, Kenji apologized. Lee, looking at him with a grin, said if he was really feeling sorry, he should grant her one wish. Kenji agreed immediately, saying that since she got hurt twice because of him, he owed her at least one wish. Lee then asked him, playfully, to get on his knees and apologize. Kenji raised an eyebrow and asked if she was really serious. Lee laughed and admitted she was just joking. Kenji smirked and shot back that he was joking too. A beautiful girl like her couldn't possibly ask for something like that. Lee playfully raised her hand as if to punch him, and Kenji backed up, laughing, insisting it was a joke. Lee giggled and said he could hit her back if he wanted to, asking if he'd really do it. Kenji nodded, saying since she said so, he'd have to, and both of them burst out laughing. Lee, still laughing, said it was so funny she felt like her wound might reopen. Kenji replied that even if it was just a light punch, it was actually his first time hitting a girl, so maybe he had finally become a bad guy after all. Then, Lee told him he was starting with that nonsense again, asking if he had a loose screw or something. Kenji smiled and said it wasn't like that. These days, he's been learning a lot. He added that she wasn't just bad. She was also kind, a rare combo. Hearing that, Lee leaned in as if to kiss him. Seeing her move in, Kenji stepped back slightly and asked why she was acting like this. If she was angry or something. That question made Lee frown instantly. She pulled away and snapped that he was a total loser. Slow, clueless, and destined to stay single forever. Kenji, looking shocked, quickly apologized and asked her to come back. But Lee scoffed and asked how he could say that when he was calling her back like some loser. Just then, a small girl ran up and slapped Lee's leg, calling her mean for being rude to someone kind. Turned out she was Song's little sister. Song stepped in and explained that his sister had really wanted to meet Kenji, so he had to bring her along. But as soon as she saw Kenji, she got nervous and ran away. Now, the little girl was telling Song to hit Lee because she called Kenji a loser. Song chuckled awkwardly and apologized, saying he didn't mean to interrupt what seemed like a nice moment between Kenji and Lee. He felt like he'd ruined everything. Lee, however, brushed it off and told him not to worry. He should just take care of his little sister properly. Kenji added that it wasn't a big deal, they were just fake fighting anyway. Then, Lee started her bike and sped off, leaving Kenji calling after her. He stood there confused, wondering why she left so suddenly and why she had been acting so strangely. As he stared off, Song's little sister came up and asked if he was okay. Kenji smiled and said he was totally fine and apologized for making her worry. Afterward, Song turned to him and said there was something important he wanted to talk about. Kenji raised an eyebrow and asked what it was. Song replied that it was about the lame super alliance. Meanwhile, at home, Kenji's second uncle was watching everything unfold through binoculars. He sighed and said the young master really didn't know anything. Next to him, the third uncle asked why Miss Lee left so suddenly and begged for answers, especially about why that little girl hit her. He even wondered aloud if the two were going to kiss or not. The second uncle firmly declared that they clearly needed to teach the young master everything about dating. He proposed they come up with a proper plan to train him in romance. The third uncle asked if they should call Kenji back. The second uncle agreed and said yes, bring him in. But just then, another uncle pointed out that Kenji seemed to be having an important talk with Song. Maybe they should let them finish first. He also suggested they could keep Song's little sister entertained, so the boys could talk in peace. Then the second uncle said if that was the case, fine. Both of them should go bring Song's sister, and in the meantime, he would prepare something to eat. But then, almost suspiciously, he paused and asked if either of them had ever actually played with a child before. At that, both uncles put on creepy expressions and tried to act playful, mumbling weird things like, "Ulyulu peekaboo," and pretending to bribe a child with candy. The second uncle instantly smacked them both on the head and scolded them, saying he'd go get the girl himself. Meanwhile, one uncle mumbled that maybe he got hit because he forgot to stick his tongue out. On the other side, Kenji confidently said to Song that he had already told the Super Alliance he would beat all of them up. Song's sister curiously asked what this Super Alliance was, and whether that girl was one of them. Song replied that no, her name was Lee, and she wouldn't understand what they were talking about anyway. Then Kenji turned to the little girl and asked if she wanted to visit his house. He reminded her that she once said she wanted to thank the uncles who sent her food. The girl nodded excitedly and said yes, she really wanted to thank them. Kenji then said, "Okay then, let's go and thank Uncle Sang." Song agreed it was a good idea and turned to his sister, telling her she knew how to greet adults, right? Just then, the second uncle arrived. Seeing him, Yu nervously said hello. Kenji introduced him, saying he was Uncle Gai Sang, the one who made tasty food for them. Uncle Sang, holding a knife, said it was nice to meet her and asked if they should play together and then cook something. Seeing the knife, Song's sister immediately started crying. Kenji quickly asked what he was doing, pulling out a knife in front of a child. The uncle replied that when Kenji was a kid, he used to like this kind of thing too. Maybe the only difference was that this time he didn't lick the knife. Kenji explained that this wasn't the same. Song's sister was a small child and liked bears. He asked if they had any teddy bears or dolls. The moment he mentioned bear, the second uncle said he knew exactly what to do. He ripped his shirt open and showed the big tattoo on his back, the symbol of the Fire Bear Gang. Meanwhile, the other uncles were watching and commented that the second uncle was probably going to scare the poor girl. Song and Kenji also looked shocked and told him he was going to scare her. But surprisingly, Song's sister smiled and looked happy. She said it looked like a real bear and even had a fish drawn on it. Hearing that, the second uncle happily asked the little girl if they should go inside and cook something. She shouted yes, and started walking cheerfully. Song told his sister that the man in front of them was the same uncle who always sent food for them. He reminded her not to forget to thank him. His sister nodded and left with Uncle. Then Kenji jumped in, asking what the Super Alliance was planning next. Song guessed they would definitely make their next move soon since they must have already heard that Zhang and his team had been defeated. Rumors were already spreading that Kenji was the successor of the Fire Bear Gang. And on top of that, he had openly declared that he would take down the Super Alliance. Song admitted he usually didn't say this kind of thing, but this time he warned Kenji to be careful. Kenji replied that being careful was fine, but he had already decided he was going to beat them all up. Song smiled and said he had expected that kind of answer from him. Still, to actually defeat them, they would need information, and Park Do might be their way in. Song explained that Park Do had invited him to join the alliance multiple times, and had Kenji not messed with them earlier, he probably would have been approached too. Kenji made it clear that no matter what, he'd never join that lame alliance. Song then asked if he planned to fight them alone. Kenji admitted he wasn't confident, but since he had made the declaration, he would stand by it and train harder. Song admitted that earlier, he didn't care much about the Super Alliance or the bullies, but now, things had changed. Kenji asked what he meant by changed. Song explained that even if he did nothing, those guys would still come after him, so instead of getting beat up later, he'd rather take them down first. Kenji lit up, realizing that meant Song would fight by his side. He joked that they could consider themselves an alliance too. Song clarified they weren't exactly an alliance, just two people fighting together. Kenji suggested naming their duo Song and Kenji to rival the Super Alliance, but Song instantly rejected the idea, reminding him again that this wasn't a formal alliance, so no need for names. Meanwhile, Song's sister and the second uncle were busy making bear-shaped cookies. The uncle praised her for doing a good job and said it was time to bake them. Once the cookies were out of the oven, the little girl happily declared that she loved bears and called him Bear Grandpa, saying he was the best and totally awesome. Embarrassed, the uncle corrected her, asking her to call him Uncle, not Grandpa. Then, he asked if they should do the bear dance, and without hesitation, they both started dancing. Just then, first uncle walked in and was horrified. He angrily asked what second uncle was doing shirtless in front of a small child. Second uncle tried to explain, but first uncle wasn't interested in listening and stepped forward, ready to punch him. He shouted that he needed to teach this child abuser a lesson. At that moment, Song's little sister grabbed his leg and begged him not to hurt her uncle. First uncle looked down at her and sternly told her to move aside. He'd teach this disrespectful man a lesson first, and then he'd drop her home. Second uncle, clearly nervous, explained that there was a misunderstanding. This was Song's little sister, and he was simply playing with her. First uncle's mood softened when he realized the girl was Song's sister. He handed her a cookie, and she sweetly thanked him, inviting him to eat cookies with her. Then, second uncle, still feeling a little insecure, asked why she called him Grandpa, while calling him, first uncle, Uncle. The girl casually answered that he was Uncle, and the other one was Bear Grandpa. Then she turned to first uncle and curiously asked if he also had a bear on his back. First uncle proudly said yes. Next, the three of them, first uncle, second uncle, and Song's sister, started doing the bear dance together. It was a wholesome and hilarious scene. Just then, Song and Kenji walked in and caught the mid-dance. Kenji, surprised, asked what the uncles were up to. Embarrassed, the two uncles stopped and awkwardly greeted him, calling him young master and asking when he had arrived. Song's sister, still excited, invited both boys to join in the bear dance. First uncle said it had been a long time since he danced and that they should do it together since the little girl enjoyed it. Kenji grinned and agreed. Song hesitated, wondering if he really had to join in. But the uncles reminded him that she was his sister. Was he really going to break her heart? Eventually, all five of them joined in for the dance. After a while, they all flopped down, exhausted. Kenji chuckled and said dancing after so many days felt refreshing. The uncles agreed, saying they had fun too. Then Song looked at himself in disbelief, almost wondering out loud what he had just done. Meanwhile, his little sister had dozed off, worn out from all the dancing. Kenji noticed and told the uncles he would drop her home. Second uncle, feeling guilty for not making anything special for the child, quickly offered to pack the leftover cookies for her. Song thanked him. Before they left, first uncle reminded them to return after dropping the girl off. There was a meeting they needed to have regarding the young master. Kenji nodded and assured him they'd be back. Second uncle decided to join them as well, saying it would be quicker if he drove them. After dropping the girl off and making sure she was tucked in, Song returned. Kenji asked if she was sleeping peacefully or if there was a chance she'd wake up. Song said she was completely worn out and wouldn't wake until morning. Soon, everyone gathered for the meeting. Kenji looked around and asked where the other uncles were. First uncle replied that, given the seriousness of the situation, They were keeping this meeting small and secret. He said he would discuss it with Kenji first before telling the others. Kenji, now curious, asked what this serious matter was. That's when first uncle revealed something unexpected. The gangster who had fought Kenji might actually be part of their gang. Kenji and Song looked at each other, stunned. Suddenly, second uncle slammed his fist on the table and told Kenji to try and remember what the gangster looked like. He urged Song too, anything they could recall, any facial features or unique details could be important. Then third uncle calmly intervened, asking Hyung Nim to settle down. He reminded him that yelling or pounding on the table wouldn't help them remember anything faster. Song suddenly recalled that the gangster had a large scar across his face. Second uncle immediately wondered if it could be gone, since he had a scar too. But third uncle sarcastically added that if having a scar made someone a suspect, then they all should be under suspicion, since even he had marks on his face. First uncle defended himself, saying his scar was just a tiny one, while second uncle chimed in proudly that the one on his head was cute. At this point, Kenji snapped and yelled that if it had been third uncle, he would have recognized him immediately. The scar on the gangster's cheek was very distinct. Hearing that, all three uncles grew serious. Song added that the guy's height must have been around 185 centimeters, and his body build resembled Uncle Gon's. Kenji, thinking back, agreed and said if he were really from the Fire Bear gang, one of them would have recognized him. Then, remembering the incident more clearly, Kenji said the gangster had mentioned knowing him. He even came specifically looking for him. That man definitely knew him and had talked about his own Hyung Nim. Now, a quick clarification. In the Fire Bear gang, Kenji's father is one of the top leaders, referred to as Hyung Nim. It's not a name but a title used in the gang. All gang members take on the surname Hyung Nim to honor their leader, and junior members use it to address their seniors. For example, first uncle refers to Kenji's father as Big Hyung Nim, while second uncle calls first uncle just Hyung Nim. Continuing the story, upon realizing all this, second uncle shouted that there really might be a traitor inside their gang. Third uncle raised his voice too, speculating that if the gangster wasn't one of them, he must be connected to Saiwon's side. He asked if they should prepare for war, but first uncle quickly shut that down, telling everyone to calm down and not jump to conclusions without proof. He emphasized that no one should make such bold claims unless they were ready to take full responsibility for the consequences. Both second and third uncle immediately apologized, admitting they had overreacted. Kenji stepped in and reminded them to stay calm since Song was also there. He suggested they observe the situation carefully before making any decisions. First uncle nodded and apologized to the young master, agreeing that Kenji's suggestion was wise. He said they had to find that attacker no matter what. Then he handed over the conversation to second uncle, saying he would now explain everything about the Super Alliance. Second uncle began by describing how students from 4 schools, Mujin High, Jiren High, Meijin High, and Sangneum High, were always getting into street fights. Eventually, a legendary fighter arrived and unified them into a single team. Kenji and Song were intrigued and asked who this legendary fighter was. Second uncle casually dropped the bomb. He was the first leader of the Super Alliance, Kim Gaisang. That made both Kenji and Song freeze in shock. They couldn't believe it. They asked again just to be sure, was he really saying that he was the one who created the Super Alliance? Second uncle continued, saying that he wasn't the one who named the group Super Alliance. That name was actually chosen by one of the group's members, someone who knew the entire story. That person was none other than Park Do, the current leader of the alliance. Second uncle then picked up his phone to call him. Meanwhile, Park Do was at home watching TV, feeling a bit hungry. He grumbled to himself, wondering where Lee had disappeared to. Just then, Lee walked in. Park Do asked casually if she wanted to eat ramen, but she ignored him and walked away. Suddenly, his phone rang, and when he saw second uncle's name, he froze. He got nervous, wondering why he was calling this late. When he finally picked up and said hello, second uncle filled him in on everything and asked him to share the whole backstory with Kenji. Hearing that, Park Do lit up with excitement. He saw it as the perfect opportunity to shine. Second uncle ended the call, saying they'd meet soon, and turned to Kenji, telling him that Park Do would now fill him in on the latest story. Then, second uncle decided to share his own high school tale first. He began explaining how his early days at Jiren High were really tough. He used to fight daily but never gave up because he had always been good at fighting. He had some solid skills right from the start. Meanwhile, back at Park Do's place, Lee was silently fuming, thinking how Kenji didn't know how to read the atmosphere at all. Just then, Park Do burst into her room and shouted, asking if she liked Kenji. Lee stared at him and asked if he had lost his mind, demanding that he get out of her room. She asked where he got that ridiculous idea. Park Do, ignoring her protest, grinned and said, so it was true. Then he casually asked her to bring a pen and paper. Annoyed, Lee hurled a pillow at his face and accused him of teasing her. Park Do finally explained that he had received a special task, to explain everything about the Super Alliance to Kenji. But for that, he had to be alone with him. Then he added that if Lee already knew everything, she could do the explaining instead. That instantly cheered her up. She beamed and said that meant she could be the one to talk to Kenji alone. Park Do smirked and muttered that his sister had way too much brain when it came to useless things. Lee, now excited at the chance to get closer to Kenji, quickly grabbed a pen and paper, ready to take notes. Then Park Do, suddenly reminded of his hunger, mentioned that he was starving. Lee ran off at full speed to make him some ramen. Meanwhile, Park Do was scheming. He thought that if his sister married Kenji, he'd become the brother-in-law of the Fire Bear Gang's future boss. That would earn him a top position in the gang. He couldn't let this opportunity slip by. He'd make sure they got close. Then Lee could become the lady boss, and he started laughing to himself, dreaming of his grand future. Back with Second Uncle, he was finishing his story. He explained how he had defeated fighters from all 4 schools and brought their bosses together to form the alliance. His goal was to unite them and take control of other regions. He had traveled across different areas, beating local gangs and gaining influence over new territories. Second Uncle continued his story, saying that everything changed for him the day he met a man named Jae-wook Hyung Nim. That encounter turned his life around. He decided to follow Jae-wook and eventually joined the Fire Bear Gang. First Uncle laughed and added that, back then, Second Uncle had been completely crazy and full of fire. Song, now invested in the story, asked if, considering the deep history Second Uncle had with the Super Alliance, ending it would really be the right thing to do. Kenji, hearing that, realized how much effort his uncle had put into building the alliance. Feeling guilty, he apologized for wanting to destroy it. Second Uncle gently reassured him that it was okay. Ever since he joined the Fire Bear Gang, he had only used the alliance as a tool to identify strong members for the gang. He admitted that, at one point, he had become a little too obsessed with the alliance, probably because he had never gone to university. The Super Alliance had become a symbol of his high school memories, the one piece of youth he still held on to. Kenji nodded, understanding his feelings, and said that in that case they wouldn't destroy the alliance, they would just take out the bad guys. Second Uncle smiled, holding back tears, and told the young master that if this alliance helped him grow, he had no problem with it. In fact, it would be an honor if Kenji became successful because of something he had built. Kenji grinned and, in his own dramatic style, declared that in that case, he would destroy the entire alliance, just to protect Second Uncle's honor. That made Second Uncle emotional, and his eyes welled up again. First Uncle stepped in and said it was time for both Kenji and Song to get some rest. He told them Jaeun would drop Song home. As the 3 of them, Kenji, Song, and Jaeun, left the room, First Uncle turned to Second and Third Uncle and said they needed to talk while the boys were away. The other 2 asked what it was about. First Uncle revealed that he had a strong suspicion about the person who had dared to attack the young master. However, he emphasized that they needed to investigate thoroughly before making any serious moves. Third Uncle raised the concern that if the suspicion was true, this situation could lead to war. Second Uncle, still struggling to believe it, said it was hard to accept that someone from their own gang might be a traitor. But First Uncle reminded them again that they weren't sure yet. There was still a chance the attacker wasn't even from their gang. That's why, he said, they needed to collect as much information as possible before making any kind of move. He added that if a war did break out, they had to be the ones to strike first. And quietly, he confessed that he sincerely hoped the attacker wasn't one of their own.